And where we are in Unit 6. So the plan for today, we're going to get through 6. We're just about done. We're going to get through Unit 20 pretty quickly. And then we're going to get started on the big stuff today, which is Unit 7. Do I have a question?
I'm fairly confident they told him to use the inclement
I'm thinking that is
thing
an accidental on mute. So let me take care of that. And Unit 6. So while I'm getting myself set up, why don't you guys remind me in the chat? We started talking about Unit 6. We started talking about public land use controls. We're finishing that up today, and then we're going to get into private land use controls. So public land use controls. Tell me in the chat, who enforces public land use controls? Who enforces that? Yeah. Looks like we're pretty good about that. The law enforcement, the police, the government is who enforces public land use control. So we spent a lot of time last class talking about zoning. So if your neighbor has broke zoning, let's say you're zoned only for residential, and your neighbor decides that they want to convert their garage into a hair salon, and it's a busy hair salon, and all of a sudden you have added traffic on your road, you have people parking in your front yard, right? Like this hair salon is a big detriment to you. What are you going to do about it? I guess you could go knock on your neighbor's door, say, don't do that. What do you think they're going to say? You know, so if your neighbor, if anybody's violating zoning, then you're going to want to call the cops. You're going to want to get law enforcement. I think my husband has successfully gotten out of the driveway, just a couple skids. He's on the main road though. So that was my biggest concern about him leaving, was getting out of the driveway. So he did good. Maybe the skid was for show. I don't know, but you know how that goes. So any questions? This is where we ended. Yeah. And if you're just joining us, please remember to tell me that you're here. So we last left talking about this Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. And this is just protecting the consumer when you're marketing subdivisions with 25 or more lots across state lines. And remember, we talked about all marketing is across state lines today, right? Because we market using the internet. So anytime you're advertising information, subdivisions of 25 or more lots, then you need to report the essential information about the property. People deserve to know what they're buying. Still talking about public land use controls. Let's talk about some building codes. Building codes are statewide codes. Remember, zoning is local in nature, but building codes are statewide codes. And building codes give us minimum construction standards. They set the floor. If you want to build a building, here are the minimum construction standards. Can the builder and the developer do more than the minimum? Can they go above and beyond? Of course they can. Building codes just say this is the bare minimum, this is how low you can go. And with building codes, safety is the primary purpose. We're protecting the best interest. We don't want buildings falling on people's heads. So we're protecting the best interest of the public. And one way that we can enforce building codes is through zoning. How does zoning enforce building codes? Because they require individuals to get a building permit. So if you want to build new construction, if you want to do major renovations to your existing construction, if you want to do demolition and tear down, or if you want to do major renovations, then a building permit is required. So you go down to the city and you request a permit, and upon acceptance, the permit gives you permission to build. The permit gives you permission. The permit says that the city has reviewed it. It doesn't break any zoning violations. It's in compliance with their master plan. When it comes to the major renovations, I've always heard that if you're messing with electrical, plumbing, or structural, you should get a permit. So if you're finishing the unfinished basement, or if you are adding a room to the back of your house, then permits would be suggested. The inspector will come out throughout the process, right, to make sure that you're building it per these building codes. They're going to check it, they're going to verify it. And upon satisfactory completion, then they will issue a certificate of occupancy, also known as a CO. A certificate of occupancy closes out a permit. So the permit is permission to build or permission to do the major renovation. The CO closes out the permit. The CO says that that space or that structure has been built or rebuilt satisfactorily, according to the state building codes. In Unit 7, if not today, then on Thursday, we're going to start talking about something called a material fact. So hang on to that for right now. We'll come back to that. If you ever are listing a property and you come across unfinished space, unpermitted space, not unfinished, unpermitted space, the fact that that space is unpermitted is a material fact. We have to disclose to the public that the finished basement was done so without a permit. We have to disclose to the public that the room you added to the back of your house was done so without a permit. I can advertise a space. I can include it in my total heated square footage. We're going to talk about total heated square footage in Unit 8. So we'll talk more about that then. I can advertise it. I can say this is this many square feet. What I have to disclose is that it was unpermitted. I went on a listing appointment a couple years ago. I always get the question, well, how do we know? Well, sometimes we got to ask questions, right? If you walk into a house and it looks like a room's been added, ask questions. If you walk into a house and it looks like the basement's been finished, ask questions. Wow, you did a nice job on this basement. Did you have it permitted when you did the space? Sometimes we have to ask questions. I went on this listing appointment a couple years ago, and it was an acquaintance of mine. I knew her when she bought the house 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever. I went over and oohed and awed 10 years ago when she bought the house. She called me a couple years ago and said, I want to sell. Do you want to list it? Which I said, yeah. So, and it was a competitive listing appointment, which means she was talking about to more than one agent, more than one broker. We'll talk about that when we get into Unit 7 and 8. And I did my research on the property before I went over for my listing appointment. Again, we'll talk about that when we get into Unit 7 and 8. And upon looking at the tax records and remembering from when I saw the house when she bought it, it's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. She purchased a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. The tax record said 3-bedroom, 1-bath. I go over for the listing appointment and she's giving me the grand tour showing off. And lo and behold, there's a second bathroom. Did I have a little flag go up to ask me to answer some questions, to ask some questions? Sure, because the tax record said 3-bed, 1-bath. I knew it to be a 3-bed. And I said, well, that's a nice bathroom. Where'd that come from? And she said, oh, well, we took part of the hall and we took part of this back closet and we took part of the kitchen and we just, made a bathroom right here. And I said, all right. I said, you guys have it permitted? And she said, no, we didn't have it permitted. She said, does it matter? And I said, no, I can advertise a 3-bed, 2-bath, but I have to disclose that that second bathroom wasn't permitted. Does that make sense to everybody? I didn't get that listing. Truth be told, nobody got that listing. She ended up going for sale by owner. And while I don't know for sure, I have a feeling it has something to do with that second bathroom because we all probably said the same thing. Guys, think about it. A good buyer's agent is going to do the same research that I just did. So what is a good buyer's agent going to find? They're going to find 3-bed, 1-bath, and they're going to have a flag to go up to ask a lot of questions. So she went for sale by owner. I told her she could have gotten it permitted after the fact. She could call the county and have them come out permitted after the fact. You can't do as good of a job with permitting after the fact, because the only way to know if there's a problem with electrical behind this wall is to do what? Tear down the wall, right? So never show up to a listing appointment with your crowbar ready to tear down any walls or anything, but they can come in and they can still, you know, check the outlets, right? Check the plumbing, what they can. So they can permit after the fact. So Dawn, that's that. How could she go about it? Call the county. I guess she didn't make. So any changes you make to the house should have permitted before selling. Again, with permitted, I've always heard when you're messing with plumbing, electrical, and structure. Anytime you're messing with plumbing, electrical, and structure, you should have a permit. So unpermitted space, again, I could have advertised a 3-bed, 2-bath. What I have to disclose, what is the material fact, is that that second bath is unpermitted. It was finished, it was completed without any permits. So here's a quick side-by-side comparison. We said building codes are construction standards for safety. Zoning regulations are local laws that regulate land use. Building codes are construction standards. Zoning regulations are local laws that regulate land use. Questions on permits, building codes? Question came in, why is that a problem for the sale? Well, first off, the tax information is not right. And second, you know, not everybody's as handy as what they think. If you were buying a home, would you want to know that somebody knew what they were doing? I mean, guys, let's be honest. We all have access to YouTube and a hammer, right? Does that make me a handyman? I got YouTube and a wrench. That make me a plumber, right? Sometimes we're given too many tools and so many people think they're better than what they are. Project is under a certain dollar amount, you still have to pull permits. I don't know the answer to that. What I've always heard with pulling permits is if you're messing with plumbing, electrical, and structural. Worst case scenario, you call the county, you say, I need a permit. They say, no, you don't, right? Okay. Interesting. Lots of space out there is unpermitted. Lots of space. Okay, so bottom line, how do we get to it? Just ask questions. You can see when things don't look original sometimes. Still in our public land use controls, still talking about public land use controls. Question came in, why would people not get a permit? Maybe they just know. Some of you didn't know until right now that you needed a permit when you're messing with electrical, right? Maybe they don't know. Maybe they're just trying to beat the system. Maybe they don't have enough time. Maybe they don't think they need one because they have YouTube and a hammer. I don't need a permit. I can do this. Maybe they don't want to spend money on a permit. All right. So switching gears, we're going to kind of switch topics, still on public land use control. Kind of a crappy topic, I know, but it is what it is. Public land use controls, when you're dealing with on-site septic systems. On-site septic systems, this is not referring to public community or public sewer systems. This is on-site septic systems. In order to determine if raw land is suitable for an on-site septic system, the county health department is going to perform a soil suitability test, also known as a PERC test. They're going to determine if the land can support an on-site septic system. Where's it going to flow? Where's the structure have to go in relation to it? You don't want the sewer system higher than the structure, right? Because it flows down. So you don't want that. The capacity of the tank that the septic system, that the land can hold. PERC tests And improvement permits come from the county health department, whatever county the property is located in. In the improvement permit is going to, as we said, is going to list the capacity. Capacity for septic systems is stated in number of bedrooms. No, let me rephrase that. It's stated in numbers of people. They figured 2 persons per bedroom, 2 human heartbeats per bedroom. So if the capacity of the tank is for 6 people, we can only advertise a 3-bedroom house. If you're listing a property with an on-site septic system, you can only advertise the number of bedrooms as per allowed per the septic system with 2 human heartbeats per room. I have shown many of property that we're standing in what could be a perfectly good 4th bedroom. There's no reason why this couldn't be a 4th bedroom, but the advertisement calls it an office or a bonus area. They have a 3-bedroom with an office. Why don't they have a 4-bedroom? Because the septic system will only allow 3. Agents are getting themselves in trouble for this today. I had a teammate went on a listing appointment a couple months ago, and he showed up for his listing appointment, started talking about the 3-bedroom house, and people said, oh no, it's 4-bedroom. We bought a 4-bedroom. And he said, not according to the septic system. I can only advertise 3-bedroom. Could you imagine how upset these people were? They thought they bought a 4. They were told they were buying a 4. And now that they're going to sell it, they're being told they can only sell it as a 3 with an office or a bonus. So capacity is very important. If your seller doesn't have that improvement permit, have them call the county health department. They can come out and inspect the septic system and issue a permit. Again, a good buyer's agent is going to ask for it, right? So go ahead and get ahead of the curve in some cases. So the permit is going to tell you the capacity. It's going to tell you the location. Again, you don't want the septic system higher than, to run downhill to the home, to the structure. You want the home to be higher than the septic system. Are there uses that the system won't support? For example, not all septic systems can support a dishwasher or garbage disposal. Are there limitations to the use? You don't want to overload the system. We as brokers need to verify the septic system. Again, if you're a seller, if you're going at a listing appointment and your seller, no, I don't have a permit, great, call the county health department and get one. They can make an appointment to come out and inspect and issue a permit. You as brokers need to see that septic permit before you advertise number of bedrooms. Please hear me, guys. Agents are getting themselves in trouble all the time right now. We can only advertise the number of bedrooms as allowed per the on-site septic system. Failure to improperly represent the number of bedrooms or information about a septic system, you could be sued. You can always be sued. You can sue anybody for anything. So you can always be sued. You could also face disciplinary action through the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. This comes up all the time. This was a big topic in our continuing education class a couple years ago. Also going to address straight piping. This is when your water waste is just charged directly into a yard or a nearby creek or stream. Remember, when we're talking about water waste, we're not always talking about black water. We're talking about gray water too. So the water that comes from your washing machine, I think that's one of the more common examples of straight piping, that I've heard of. If we come across it, it's a material fact, we have to disclose it. The new buyer is going to have a problem with it. So sometimes it's best for the seller to correct things. Black water is what comes from your commode. Gray water is other water. From your dishwasher, washing machine, etc. Questions on on-site septic systems. This is not public sewer. This is when you're dealing with a property that has an on-site septic system. Another public land use control that we already talked about back in Unit 4. We're going to talk more about it in Unit 13 is our insurance unit. There are flood zones. FEMA has designated certain areas as flood hazard, which just means they're more prone to flooding. If you're buying a property in a flood hazard, the lender very well may require flood insurance. Flood insurance is not cheap. Flood insurance can get very, very expensive. Where are my coastal people? I think I have one or two of you further down east, at least, than where we are. Obviously, the further down east you go, you're dealing more and more with flood hazards. But even here in the Triad and up west of us, all you need for a flood hazard is a creek or a stream, right? Some river, some kind of body of water nearby. So because of the flood hazard, the land may be restricted. You don't want to build straight on a flood zone, flood hazard. FEMA has a map. Do not go look now, but if you make yourself a note after class, you can just go to FEMA's website, pull up a map. I always look at the FEMA map before, when my buyer says, ooh, this is the one, write it up. I always look at the FEMA map just to get an idea before they enter into, especially if my buyers are near the top of their approved amount. Because if they're pushing the top of their approved amount, then we tack on flood insurance. Flood insurance could put them over that top, in which case they're not getting loan approval. Again, we'll talk all about working with buyers and sellers in units 7 and 8. Another public land use control is our highways. How you get to the main roads from your property. Remember we talked about private streets and public streets and subdivisions the other day. Any highway proposed construction, highway widening, any kind of project is a material fact that we have to disclose. Listing agent should disclose it. Buyer agent should be prepared to discuss it with their buyers. How do we get highway information? NCDOT. Again, don't go now, but make yourself a note. NCDOT's website, all their proposed construction projects. I had a listing a couple years ago. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. The backyard butted up to, at the time, it was Business 40 in Kernersville. I think now we're calling it 421. But at the time, and you could see Business 40, whatever. I didn't have to disclose that. It was right there. What I had to disclose, what was the material fact, was what wasn't there. This listing is awfully close to that new belt loop going through Kernersville. And one day soon, there's going to be a ramp, exit or entrance ramp to 421 nearby, near this house, near this property. That's what I had to disclose. What wasn't there, what the proposal was. I probably had this listing, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and they still haven't constructed that thing yet, but it was in the plans. It was in the works. So that's what I had to disclose. That was the material fact. Any agent that called me and said they had an interested buyer, I'm thinking about writing an offer. Great. Did you see my attachments? an MLS. My attachments in MLS, I had a map showing them what was going to happen, what the proposal was. I even had a star with an arrow pointing talking about you are here. So any buyer that bought this property, interested in this property, would know that someday, somewhere in the future, there's going to be an exit or an entrance ramp. So we just have to disclose. And again, that's the material facts that we'll get into in Unit 7. Briefly, just mentioning wetlands. Again, we see this more down towards the coast. With your wetlands, your groundwater is at or near the surface. If it's not wet, it's, you know, pretty close. It's damp, it's soggy. You may not always be able to build on wetlands because of the ground, because the ground is so wet. Wetlands are usually protected by local, state, and federal controls, help protect our wildlife. This is a side note on page 125. Your book mentions Americans with Disability Act, ADA. We're going to talk all about that in Unit 12. So make a note, Unit 19 and Unit 12. So make a note. We'll come back to that. Any questions on public land use controls? Okay. From public land use controls, now we're going to start talking about private land use controls. Private land use controls are not enforced by law enforcement. Law enforcement enforces public land use controls. Private land use controls are enforced by our HOAs. With private land use controls, you have restrictive covenants, protective covenants, same thing. Could also be called covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CCRs. The developer, when they're creating the subdivision, creates the covenants. They create the private land use controls. All HOAs are different. Even if you have two HOAs side by side, they're still different. So as a buyer's agent, we want to help them get these covenants, make sure that they're good with the rules of the subdivision before they move in. Can they be changed? It's my understanding it's a long, drawn out court battle. I would never look at a buyer and say, oh yeah, you can change that, no problem. I'm not making that decision for them. So the developer comes in, he creates a subdivision, he creates the covenants. The covenants are pertinent. What does that mean? They run with the land. So remember our fancy word back in Unit 2? So the very first homeowner in that subdivision honors the covenants. The second one, the fifth one, the 300th one. You guys see? Restrictive covenants run with the land. So all subsequent, even when the developer is finished, once they've built the last house, they get all their equipment and they leave, never to come back, the covenants still stay. That's probably a problem topic. So let's make sure we're good with that. The developer leaves, they've developed the whole subdivision, it's built, it's constructed, they leave, the covenants stay. So who enforces them after the developer leaves? Well, it's up to the developer. They turn them over to a property management company to let them enforce the covenants. Are they going to allow the homeowners to enforce? Are they going to allow the homeowners to take turns, you know, being president and vice president and secretary and treasurer and all that? So if you have an issue with covenants, don't call the cops. If you have an issue with covenants, You call whoever is enforcing it. Everybody hear me? I could pretty much, let's see, we guys check your cameras. I got a couple of you. Camera's not on. I can't see you. Need to get back in a habit. I'm pretty sure I could divide this class into two different categories. Those of you that looked at this house and went, ew, look at that house. And then there are those of you that looked at this house and went, ooh, look at that house. Which one were you? Were you an ew or a ooh? If you were an ew, you might want to consider living in a development with restrictive covenants, because while all covenants are different, I'm pretty sure bubblegum pink or Pepto-Bismol pink, whatever you want to describe this, is not going to be allowed in most HOAs. I love it. It's just me personally. Do you want to live next door to it? Do you want to live in it? It's like Barbie's house. That's where I'm going. I want to live in it. But you guys see what I'm saying? If you don't want your neighbor painting their house bubblegum pink, then you may want to think about living in covenants. If you don't want your neighbor, if you don't want the person next door to you having 10 cars in the front yard up on cinder blocks, you may want to consider an HOA. If you don't mind a couch being in the front yard, then maybe you don't need an HOA. This is definitely a preference thing. Some people are for HOAs. I like the structure. I like its whole purpose is to help preserve the value. So how do you preserve the value? You keep bubblegum pink houses out. You keep the grass in your front yard from getting too tall, right? They're all different. They all have different rules, different regulations. And if your buyer looks at you and says, I have no desire to be in an HOA with covenants, then don't show them property that are in HOAs, right? Because they're not going to change it. They're not going to make it go away. So yeah, all covenants are different. My job as the buyer's agent is to help them get these documents. If the listing agent doesn't have them available, this is public record. The developer has to put them in public record. So yeah, they're all, some will tell you what color you can have your front door. Some will tell you how high the grass in your front yard can be. Jolie's had bushes, had to be trimmed down to a certain height. And you know, there's somebody walking around that neighborhood with a yardstick, making sure the grass in your front yard is in compliance. You know, somebody's looking at your bushes to make sure they're trimmed down.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you are getting a property with a restrictive covenant, for instance, say the covenants are spelled out, are they able to change them during the duration that you're there?
Tough. It's tough, and it's going to involve going to the courts and having the judge. So I'm never going to encourage a buyer, oh, you can change that. You with me? Could it be done? I guess it depends on the mood of the judge that day. Right?
No, I mean, like, for instance, say they have listed, like you said, the grass has to be cut a certain way, the bushes have to be cut a certain way. Then a few years down the line, they add more things. Are they able to do that, or is it just binding to what you sign when you Oh,
they can amend it. They can amend it. Sure. The homeowners, right? So if the property management or the HOA, what affects the value? I mean, again, you take this house and you take 10 cars in the front yard and put them on cinder blocks. Does that affect the value? Okay, so in the covenants, certain matters that you might see addressed. Again, there's provisions requiring property maintenance, cutting your grass, keeping the couch off the front yard, keeping the cars on cinder blocks off the front yard. A couple of you mentioned pets. Some covenants may tell you can have so many animals or pets. They're all different. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? I know you all are excited because you got your covenants and your experience, but I need you guys to hear me. All covenants are different. Just because you know the covenants for this neighborhood doesn't mean you know the covenants for anything else. Okay, all covenants are different. So as you have buyers buying in different HOAs, we're going to be helping them find different covenants. And something that they may have restriction on is parking, fencing, architectural details, a shed. Guys, remember, the only thing you know by looking at a fence is that somebody put a fence there. What if you're showing property to somebody in an HOA and you get to the backyard with them and they say, oh, I was going to ask you if I can put a fence up, but I see that guy over there has a fence up, so I know I can. Just because that guy has a fence up, does that mean their covenants allow a fence? No, they could be being fined every day that they have this fence up. They could be in the throes of the legal battle with the HOA. We don't know that. Just because that guy has a fence up does not mean that your buyer can move in and put a fence up. Does not mean your buyer can move in and put a shed up. This is why we have to get them the covenants. Okay, this is why we help them. Never look at what the neighbors are doing and assume it's okay, because you don't know. What if they're being fined $150 every day that that fence is there? Can that add up pretty quickly? You bet. So as we said, they're imposed, they're created by the developer. They're enforced by either the owners association or the individual property management, or however the developer decides to create them. If they want a property management company or an owners association company or the individual property owners. They're pertinent and binding on all subsequent owners. Everybody has to follow the rules. Rules is rules. If you don't like the rules, don't move in that subdivision. It's pretty simple. Private land use controls can't be anything that is illegal. So it might be that maybe that subdivision is so old that when they were created, it was allowed, but things have changed over time, and now they're not enforceable if they're illegal today. A good example of this could be subdivisions created back in the 40s, maybe the 30s or the 40s, and they might have a covenant that says a certain color of people can live in the neighborhood. Today, that's not enforceable because fair housing has stepped in and said, anybody, despite their color, should be able to live here. So while back in the 30s, that might have been allowed, today it's illegal and it's not enforceable. I got a whole unit dedicated to fair housing. We're going to talk about fair housing in Unit 19. So we'll talk about the protected classes, the rights that everybody has to live wherever they want, as long as it's in their financial means. Subdivisions can't keep anybody out today. So we'll talk about this when we get to Unit 19. Do fees go up with covenants? Sure, sometimes HOA can increase their fees. How do they do that? Everything they do should be spelled out in the covenants, right? It's all there for you. Look at you guys breaking the covenant laws. Okay, so what if, sometimes this happens. So what if you have a direct conflict between privately imposed and publicly imposed land use controls? What if public zoning says one thing and covenants say something else? Anytime you have a conflict in a law or two laws, the more restrictive of the two will win. So which law do we follow? Whichever one is stricter. Again, this is just a kind of common theme. Whenever you have conflicting laws, conflicting information, the stricter of the two is going to prevail. So let's say the area is zoned for residential and commercial. It's multi-zoned. You can live here and you can convert your garage into a hair salon. But the covenants say you can't have any structures over 2 stories. Can you build a commercial building on your property? Zoning says yes. Restrictive covenants say you got to keep it to how many stories? You can't go over 2. The stricter of the 2 will prevail. I want everybody to please make a note after class today. If you haven't already, please pay special attention to pages 126 and 127. I remember last week we said unit 6 is like, as far as I'm concerned, it's our first unit. We actually start talking about the broker this unit. And it's big that we understand what our responsibilities are. So to wrap up this whole unit, as a listing agent, you need to verify the public and the private land use controls before you list the property. Remember we talked the other day that zoning in the Triad MLS, I can't speak for other MLSs, but in the Triad MLS, zoning is a required field, which means I can't even activate the property until I have zoning. That's the responsibility of the listing agent to make sure that they verify that zoning, to make sure that it's correct. Buyer's agents, guys, my very simple philosophy, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. So if my buyer says, I want to convert my garage into a hair salon, don't I now have a duty to make sure that their end use will be allowed? Don't I have a duty to help them make sure that when they buy this house under this zoning and this restrictive covenant, if applicable, that they can convert that garage into a hair salon? And once again, you guys are going to be so tired of me hearing me say this, but I think it's important because we need to understand, I am not an attorney. I cannot interpret documents. I can help them find, that's my job. I'm a fact finder. I help them find the information. But when your buyer or seller has those covenants in their hands and they say, what's this mean right here? I don't understand this. I'm either going to get them to the HOA to interpret it for them, or I'm going to get them to an attorney. I cannot interpret land use controls. I just help them find. Again, once you affiliate with your firm will be all about helping you. Where do I find zoning? How do I get the tax information? Where do I get NCDOT information? Where do I get all this stuff? That's the job for your future firm. Y'all don't put your cart in front of your horse. Okay, step 1, get your license. Step 2, learn how to list the property. Fair enough? Every county's different. Whatever county or counties you want to work, you'll learn how to access the information you need. Same thing we've been saying, as a property is or might be subject to zoning or covenants. Again, we just need to advise the consumer that could affect the use. It could affect the enjoyment. How's it going to affect it? I don't know until we look it up. What zoning is allowed? I don't know. I got to look it up. What do the covenants say? I don't know. I got to look it up. Again, every single covenant is different. So just because you read one yesterday doesn't mean it applies to another HOA. As the listing agent, I try to get all that information from my seller so I can show it to the buyer when they're looking. There's no requirement to do that. Some listing agents do, some don't. If that information isn't available, it's public record. I like to make my listings easy to sell though. That's my mentality, and that's just my preference. But there's no requirement to that. If you want the buyer's agent to do the legwork and find it, that's perfectly fine. Also, let your consumers know when they're getting into an owners association, an HOA, dues and assessments are very much a thing. So make sure, what are the current dues? We can look those up. Are they going to go up? I mean, maybe there's a proposal on the table, but maybe there's not. These things are subject to change. Dues are subject to change. Assessments. If they're putting an assessment on through an HOA, then they're doing stuff that are above and beyond. So maybe In a condo or a townhome community, they might do a special assessment to replace the roof or to repave the parking lot. Everybody kind of pays their own fair share in an assessment. They're improving the property. All the homeowners get to pay for that. How are they going to assess you? How often? Da, da, da. You should all be in the covenants. They should spell it all out. And again, we're helping our clients review the covenants. We're helping them find it. I'm a fact finder. I think the average public doesn't know that these are on public records. So help them find it. Again, you guys, when they look at you and say, what does this mean right here? I can't help them with that. I can't interpret those documents for them. Making sure we get them those covenants, any associations, know what they're getting into before they enter into the contract. Question came in, assessments are not included in the fees. Assessments are above and beyond HOA dues. Why would they put a special assessment on you? Maybe they're replacing the roof. Maybe they're repaving the parking lot. As agents, we need to constantly be on the look for red flags. Constantly be on the look for red flags. And this is our discussion on material fact. When you have a red flag go up, we need to recognize this is the time for me to ask more questions. This is the time for me to do some research. This is the time for me to do some investigating. What is the red flag and how can I get the proper information for my client? So a lot of material facts is looking for those red flags. Again, we'll talk more about material facts when we get into Unit 7.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
So when you have your client right there in your face and they're looking over papers, does it matter? Because to me, I'm one of those people that like to have everything right there, so I don't look like I don't know what I'm talking about. So when they have those papers right there and they're going through asking you questions, is it okay to just say, hey, let me look that up? Let me
Absolutely. I don't know, let me get back to you is a perfectly acceptable answer as long as you get back to them. I hear you, Cassandra. You want to be as prepared as you can, but there inevitably is going to be a question that, it's going to be the darndest thing, right? You can prepare and prepare. I mean, when I do an open house, I try to learn as much about the property as I possibly can. So I'm prepared for these questions, but I can promise you somebody's going to walk in the front door and ask me something that I haven't, thought to get. Now, will I do it for the next open house? Sure, because that's part of me being prepared, right? But I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you all the questions I'm going to get. So absolutely, you can say, don't try to make something up on the fly. Oh yeah, that's fine, because that can be held against you. But what you can say is, wow, that's a good question. I'm not really sure about that. Let me look into it. Let me get back to you. You shouldn't try and BS your way through through real estate, through sales. I mean, think about the price tags on these houses, 200,000, 800,000, and your buyers are looking at you, the expert. So as the expert, sometimes helping them investigate and learn is the best thing we can do for them. Okay, so 126 and 127, I think you guys, again, if you haven't already, and don't do it now, but if you haven't already, make yourself a note, 126 and 127, there's some good information in there. And it's our first, like, what does this mean for me as a broker? The last little piece of Unit 6 is about government ownership. It's just talking, it's estimated that the government owns about 30% of the land in the country. And what do they do with that 30% of the land? Well, they have their municipal buildings, their state legislative houses, schools, parks, military stations. And that wraps up Unit 6. Those key terms back on page 109, you guys remember in Unit 6, we had a lot of zoning terms, a lot of zoning words. I said last week, I think all of those are good candidates for flashcards. You'll see a scenario on your test. Answer choice A will be a variance, B will be spot zoning, Z will be a non-conforming use, D will be buffer zone. So we have a general understanding of what all those zoning terms mean. The key point review on page 128 is your Cliffs Notes, your abbreviated version. Study the unit and then use the key point review as a review, hence the name. And then your student quiz on page 130 and 132. Questions on Unit 6. All right, so let's take 10. We come back, we're gonna go through Unit 20. So Unit 20 is up next. Okay. We're back. Real quick, I had a request for the YouTube channel, so I put that in the chat. Again, to everyone, our YouTube channel, please grab it, bookmark it, save it. If your back cameras are on, and I can see you. That's two-part. Let me take attendance real quick. And before we jump into Unit 20, I want to go back. I had a question last week. I think it was Essence that asked. Let's go back to the Connor Act real quick. Let's go back to page 101. Connor tells us what? And I can see your mouth move. Connor tells us what? Record. When you think here, Connor, think record. Connor says there are certain documents that are required to be recorded. Why? So that they're enforceable against third parties. And I made the comment the other day that we don't record our contracts. And while in practice, that's true, we don't record sales contracts. Connor on page 105 says that contracts should be recorded. Please understand, it doesn't affect the validity of a contract if you don't record it. A contract is still valid even if it's not on record. The reason that Connor suggests that we record is to make it enforceable against third parties. But guys, in practice, we think about it. If you have a cash buyer that's closing in 2 weeks, I don't have time to get to the courthouse to record. So yes, Connor requires it. And where I got this, by the way, I have a tool called the Real Estate Manual. Don't worry, you guys will get this when you come see us in post-licensing. So when you take post-licensing, we use the Real Estate Manual. This is the manual that the Real Estate Commission put out. And that's where I verified that information. That's usually my go-to. So again, it doesn't affect the validity of a sales contract. And we're going to talk about the essential elements of a sales contract in Unit 9. Connor would prefer us to record, but in practice, we're not doing. If you're going to see a test question on this, it's going to refer to the validity of a sales contract. So is a contract still valid even though it's not recorded? Everybody shake your head yes. So thank you, Essence, for pointing that out to me. If I ever miss questions in the chat, guys, sometimes when we're done, I got a 16, 20-page PDF of chat. So I don't go back and review the chat after class, okay? I just look for what I need. Like, did you tell me you came back after attendance, right? That's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. So if I ever miss one of your questions, please reach out to me outside of class. I'm not reading a 20-page doc. I'm just not doing it. Okay. So Sarah, maybe once we discuss that in just a second, that'll help. We'll see. And remind me. Okay. Everybody good? Connor says what? Connor says we record. Why? So it's enforceable against third parties. Don't forget the last part of that sentence. We record, so it's enforceable against third parties. Okay. Unit 20. Remember, I don't go in order. Pretty much from this point out, we're not going in order. So how do you know what order we're going into? Always follow the tentative schedule. I heard from several of you this weekend. What are we going to study next? What are we going to study next? The tentative schedule will tell you what we're going to study next. You can always refer back to that and have it learn, test, pass. So Unit 20 starts on page 497 in your textbook. Unit 20, we're going to breeze through this pretty quickly. We just need a basic understanding, lots of green stars. So we're going to fly through this pretty quickly. Unit 20 is the unit that's going to make you terrified to breathe the air that you breathe. Have you guys looked ahead at it yet? There are a lot of scary stuff in Unit 20. Let's start first with looking at a picture. If you guys will look with me on page 499. This is a picture of a house. This is just a good picture to show us where you can find some of these environmental issues. Now, I don't know that you're ever going to see a house with everything. If you did as your buyer's agent, I would probably suggest you not buy that house, but that's all I can do is suggest. I can't make you do anything. So unit 20, or I'm sorry, page 499 just kind of gives us an idea of where we can find some of these issues that we're getting ready to discuss in unit 20. So we're going to discuss basic environmental hazards and what's our responsibility with these environmental hazards. So environmental issues, they're growing of importance in real estate transactions. Real estate deals with people. Environmental issues are health issues. Thus, health issues are real estate issues. And as brokers, our big responsibility when it comes to environmental issues is disclosing information once we find out about it. How do we find out about it? It does not matter. But once we learn about something, we can't unlearn it. Once we hear something, we can't unhear it. Once you see something, you can't unsee it. So in unit 20, we are looking, remember these red flags. We're constantly looking for red flags. And when a red flag goes up over an environmental issue, we're advising our clients to investigate it further, research it further, call the proper people to come out and address it. With most of our environmental issues, the EPA's website is generally a good place to start. EPA's Environmental Protection Act. Don't go to EPA's website right now. Make a note, go after class. But generally with anything environmental, EPA is a good place to start. So pretty much what we're going to do for the rest of the unit is just kind of scratch surfaces on some of these environmental issues that we may come in contact and know when your little flag should go up, your little red flag should go up. So the first environmental issue we may come encounter with is asbestos. Asbestos was once used in building materials. It was used for insulation, for heat resistant. It was also used for sound resistant. We stopped building with asbestos in 1978. You don't need to know that year for asbestos. You need to know that year for something else. So hang tight on that year for just a second. So any building built after 1978, it shouldn't have problems with asbestos. Let me say this about building materials, building products. You know, when we first learned and discovered asbestos, we said, wow, this is really good to insulate our pipes and our floors and our ceilings. It's good for insulation. It took us a while before we realized that it could be harmful to us. Once we realized it was harmful, we stopped building with it, right? So anytime something new is introduced, we don't know the long-term effects. I mean, what are we building with now that we don't know yet is good for us, is bad for us? You guys know what I'm saying? So once time goes on and we learn and we say, oh my gosh, asbestos is not good, let's go ahead and ban it. So that went down in 1978. As long as asbestos is intact, it's fine. Not a problem. Asbestos becomes a concern when it becomes friable. Friable means it's broken down. The little particles break up, they get in the air, we breathe the air, those little particles get in our lungs, so we have respiratory problems. Removal isn't always the preferred method of treating asbestos, because when you remove it, you run the danger of breaking it down and breathing in those particles. So if at all possible, it's going to be suggested that encapsulation is the preferred treatment. What you're looking at here, you guys see this white thing coming off this pipe? This is friable asbestos. You see how broken down and you see how tattered that looks? Yeah, that's not good. That's released, that's friable. It's releasing those little particles. So one way that they may suggest, depends on the project, of course. If you're ever going to do demolition on a home built prior to 1978, and there's asbestos in it, they're probably going to make you remove the asbestos before you show up with the wrecking ball, because they don't want all those particles getting in the air. But if you're not doing demolition, then encapsulation generally is is the way to go. Seal it back up, wrap it back around the pipe here so those little particles don't get into our lungs. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Demaria. Were they exposed to it? High levels of exposure, long-term exposure is a big concern with asbestos. Cameras, guys. We need to move past this. So cameras on so I can see you. If I can't see you, I can't give you credit for being here. Not my rule. Okay. Another environmental concern that we have is lead. Lead can be found in paint. You guys have heard of lead-based paint. Lead can also be found in pipes, lead pipes, or lead solder. Solder is the agent that connects to metal. They solder it together. So if lead was used, lead was built from residential property in 1978. You need to know that date as it relates to lead. Flashcard if necessary. 1978, we stopped building with residential property. We stopped using lead-based paint. We stopped using lead pipes. So again, if you're listing a property or helping your buyer buy a property that was built in 1979, you don't have to worry about lead. It's only anything built prior to 1978. The EPA provides this informational booklet that you're looking at. It's called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. If you really, really want to, after class, you can go to EPA's website and download it. And it's helping to educate the buyer and the tenant. If they're getting ready to rent a property prior to 1978, it's helping to educate them about lead in the home and the dangers it can cause. When it comes to lead, our children are most susceptible. Lead can cause damage to the brain, the nervous system, these developing body parts. Children and pregnant women are most susceptible to lead. If the home was built prior to if the residential property was built prior to 1978, we have an addendum that we use, and it's the lead-based paint hazard addendum. We will look at this addendum when we're done with Unit 20. Our first form, that's exciting. Our first of many. So lead-based paint hazard addendum required on all home sales and leases built prior to 1978. If the owner knows of any presence of the home, if lead in the home, they need to disclose it. If they don't, they can't disclose what they don't know, right? So if they had contracted work done, the painters, the contractors would have sent it out, have it tested for lead. If it's a do-it-yourselfer, they may not know. You may not know you can have it tested. So the homeowner can only disclose what they know. Once they find out about it, they have a duty to disclose. We'll see this again in Unit 7 when we talk about the seller's obligations to disclose material facts. Lead addresses, there's target housing, what applies to the lead-based paint addendum, and target housing is any home, any house constructed prior to 1978. So again, you need to know that year. You must know that year, 1978. There's some exceptions to target housing. Not all residential property has to have this addendum. If the housing is for elderly people, that's not considered target housing. We don't have to have the addendum. If the housing is a 0-bedroom dwelling, what's a 0-bedroom dwelling? Think dorm rooms, studio apartments. military barracks. So target housing. As we said, the laws state that if you're performing renovations, repairs, or paintings for compensation, then you need to make sure the contractors will make sure that they get it tested to determine if there's lead in the home. Could be some daily fines for failure to do it. Again, you guys, do-it-yourselfers are exempt. They're not being paid to paint their own house, right? So contractors, painters, plumbers, anybody that could be messing with lead, they know to have it tested or they face the fines. The syllabus mentions 750 days. If you want to know what could be on your test, refer to the syllabus. If it's on the syllabus, it's a good candidate for your state exam. I agree, Becca. Those are rough because everybody see where it says per day. What's 750 times 2 weeks? It's 14 days, right? These can add up pretty quickly. So when it comes to lead, what's our responsibility? Well, again, we have a duty to disclose any known presence of lead in the home. So once the homeowner tells us that there's lead, I now have a material fact in my hand that I have to disclose. If the buyer has it researched, if the buyer has it tested, which they have the right to do, we'll talk about the buyer's right to inspect and investigate. It doesn't matter how we learn about something. Once you learn about something, you can't unlearn it. And probably one of the biggest broker's responsibilities to make sure that the owner properly completes the lead-based paint hazard addendum and that the buyer gets a copy of it. So again, we'll look at this addendum when we wrap up Unit 20. Can't you tell lead just by the chipping of it? No, it has to be sent off and be tested. And even if you do have lead, when you paint on top of it, you still have lead, right? It didn't go away just because you put a fresh coat of paint on it. Chipped paint does not mean it has lead. It just means that it's chipped. So these contractors know, have it sent off, have it tested. Lead's the only yellow star in this unit, by the way. Everything else is green. So we're spending a few more minutes on lead than anything else. Questions on lead? Okay. It was in green paint, blue paint, yellow paint. And again, you guys, as we're going to see in this addendum, required on any home built prior to 1978, the addendum does not say your home was built prior to 1978, you got lead. What the addendum says is because your home was built prior to 1978, you may have lead-based paint. It's not a guarantee that you have lead. The only way to know if you have lead in your paint is if you have it tested. Okay. Another environmental issue is radon. Radon is the product of naturally decaying matters in the ground. And those decaying matters release gases, and those gases look for cracks in the ground. They look for places to escape so they can release those gases from decaying matter. Radon is odorless, it's colorless. You can't walk outside and say, we have a high level of radon today. You can't smell it, you can't see it. Radon's everywhere. It is everywhere. The only way to find radon is to have it tested. So what happens with naturally decaying items, matters in the ground, and you plop a house on it, again, that gas is looking for somewhere to escape. And if it happens to escape in the home, then you could have high levels of radon in the home. The EPA sets 4.0 picocuries and higher as undesirable. So you're buying a house. Your agent asks if you want to have the radon tested. You say, sure. They come in, they set this contraction up in the home. Usually around this area, most of our home inspectors are certified to test for radon. So part of their home inspection, they come in and they set up this little contraction in the home. And every hour it takes a snapshot of the radon level. And they leave that contraction in for like 2 or 3 days. So at the end of that 2 or 3 days, they come in and they look at an average. If that average is 4.0 picocuries or higher, then you may want to consider a mitigation system. The mitigation system is the remedy for radon. What you're looking at on the side of this house, you guys see this pipe coming out? It's drilled into the crawl space here. It's drilled into the lowest level of the home. And then there's a bunch of little fans in this pipe that pulls the radon from in the home up the pipe, out into the air, out into the atmosphere where the radon belongs anyway. So mitigation systems help pull the radon out of the home into the air where it is anyway. Again, you guys, radon gets tricky because you could have it tested and have, you know, your radon come back at 1 point something, and then your next door neighbor could have it tested and have it come back at 12 point something. Okay, so there is no, oh, well, this area is good on radon, so this whole neighborhood's good. It doesn't work like that. Picocuries. So ventilation usually resolves the issue. Some people will argue that vacant homes tend to have higher levels of radon than occupied homes because occupied homes are breathing, right? Doors and windows are opening and closing. There's usually some kind of heat or AC on. So again, you got to take the conditions into matter too. You know, another problem could be new construction. We're building new construction so tightly sealed, no air is getting in and out. The good news is cold air isn't getting out or getting in. But the bad news is that radon air may not be getting out. So some builders are starting to build with a radon system in place. Again, the only way to know for sure is to have it tested. When we get into units 9 and 10, more 10, we're going to talk about the buyer's rights, how they can have as much of the property investigated and inspected. Once you learn that radon levels are 4.0 picocuries or higher, that becomes a material fact. So homes in North Carolina are sold as is. We're going to learn in unit 7 and 8 that the sellers aren't required to do any repairs. They don't have to, as is. So let's say you're getting ready to buy a house, and no, let's not do that. Let's say you're the listing agent. You advertise a home for sale, buyer comes along, makes an offer, goes under contract. Per the terms of the contract, they're allowed to have the homes investigated and inspected. And lo and behold, they have the radon tested and it comes back at 6.0 picocuries. Buyer asks the seller, will you put in a mitigation system? Seller doesn't have to. Homes are as is. Seller's not required to do any repairs. Seller says, no, I'm not putting in a mitigation system. Buyer says, fine, and he terminates. He has the right to do that under certain circumstances in the contract that we will look at in Unit 10. So the buyer terminates. As the listing agent, you now have a material fact on your hand, right? You now have a duty to disclose this 6.0 picocuries to the next buyer, the buyer after that, the buyer after that. So sometimes it might be in the seller's best interest to do the repairs. Listing agents, have this conversation with your sellers. Radon's not going to go away. And now I know that it tested at 6.0 picocuries. I now have a duty to disclose that to the next buyer. It's a conversation we have to have. Ultimately, their decision if they put in the mitigation system or not. Kind of previewing into where we're heading. This unit's doing good to introduce us to some of that. This is a map. Radon was a thing. This was our CE class 2017, 2018. So it may not be exactly entire or accurate, but it kind of gives you an idea. The purple indicates radon levels across the state. The further east you go, the less issues you may have, because the ground down there is more sandy, right? The further west you go, the ground is more rocky. But look, radon's everywhere across the state. And the only way to know for sure is to have it tested. Encourage your buyers to have it tested. If they pair it with the home inspection, they're looking at like 150 bucks. And what's 150 bucks in the big picture of buying a house? You guys with me? If nothing else, you get peace of mind. It's entirely up to them though. So when it comes to radon, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission says we have a duty to disclose anything that's 4.0 picocuries or higher. Once you learn about it, you know about it. And if you see a radon mitigation system, it's not worth getting excited about just yet. It could have been put in there just for precautionary. When you see a radon mitigation system, that's one place you should have your little red flag go up to encourage you to ask questions. As the listing agent, ask the seller, oh, did you guys put that in? Did you do it as precautionary? Did you have a high radon level? As a buyer's agent, it's still, even though you see a radon mitigation system, it's still advisable to have your buyers have it tested. I showed a home a couple years ago, and there was a radon mitigation system in the basement. My buyers and I mean, we stood there and had a conversation about it. We talked about it. We pointed at it. We said, you see this right here? I mean, we had a conversation about staying in the basement. And I encouraged my buyers to have it tested anyway, just in case. And they had it tested and it came back at like 4.5, 4.6. Nothing to get excited about, but it is more than 4.0, right? So I called the listing agent called the seller called their radon guy. The radon guy came out. I'm going to go back for 1 second. You know, we talked about these little fans that pull the air out of the house into the air. Sometimes those little fans don't last forever. So what had happened was those little fans stopped working. So the radon guy replaced the fans, had it retested, and we're back down to 2 point something. So even if you have a mitigation system, you know, every 5, 10 years or so, it may not be a bad idea to have it tested to make sure those little fans, because if the fans aren't working, it's not doing any good. I hear you can get home testing kits at like Lowe's and Home Depot. I haven't personally had any experience with them, but it might be a good place to start. Comments on radon. If it goes, that's right. So once you correct it and it goes under 4.0, it's no longer a material fact because it's been corrected. It's only a material fact if it's 4.0 picocuries and above. So once you get it back down to 3.9, you're good. No more material fact. Okay. Another environmental issue is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is found in pressed wood products, so think like particle board, plywood. Formaldehyde was maybe once used in foam insulation. I don't know how much it's used today. And it could be found in certain glues that holds furniture together. I had a pre-licensing student last year said she recently bought a bed and it came with a tag that said this could be constructed with formaldehyde glues. It gave her a, not even a warning, just a precaution. We banned it in 1982. Don't need to know that year, but we did ban it at some point. Since then, it's been reduced to a warning. The courts determined that there was insufficient evidence to support the ban. So, like my student last year, you may still find furniture with formaldehyde in it. All they have to do is give you the warning. Again, ventilation. Ventilation can cause so many of our inside environmental concerns. Open doors, open windows, run the heat, run the AC, keep air moving. Another thing that can greatly be improved by ventilation is carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is really bad. You can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't see it. Carbon monoxide is a byproduct of incomplete fuel combustion. So you're trying to connect and it's not, and it's releasing these gases. And the gases that it's releasing is deadly. Guys, carbon monoxide is no joking matter. If there's carbon monoxide in your home, you go to bed at night and you just don't wake up in the morning. It's that simple. You can get a lot of our smoke detectors now are dual detectors. You can get a smoke detector paired with a carbon monoxide detector. If you don't have a carbon monoxide detector in your home, please go get one. That's the only thing that can save your life. Y'all remember that hotel in Boone? When was that? 10 years ago? 2 families died because of a carbon monoxide leak. Y'all remember that? It's to my understanding today, hotels are required to have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide. Again, if you don't have a carbon monoxide detector, please go get one. You remember that? Yeah, it was crazy. Again, you just go to sleep and you just don't wake up. That's it. Another environmental issue is electromagnetic fields. These are our electrical currents, our high tension power lines. The jury's still out about the health implications from electromagnetic fields. You can have tests done from the power company if you're concerned about the electrical currents surrounding your home. I've learned this is a preference thing. Some buyers don't want to be near one, other ones don't care. So electromagnetic fields, Tulsa Tower. Yeah, anywhere you got generating moving currents. Have you guys ever stood close to one of these things? You can like hear it, feel it. It's really weird. I showed a house once and there was just one, not this whole field that you guys are looking at, but there was just one in the lot next door. And as soon as we got out of the car, we heard like this. It was weird. My buyers didn't know how they felt about it until they got there. There were other reasons not to buy this house, but I think that was one of them. Does it give you cancer? Again, I'm not an expert. All I can tell you is that the jury's still out about the health implications. Another environmental issue is groundwater contamination. Groundwater is any water that exists under the Earth's surface. When that water gets contaminated, it can affect our drinking water. So it threatens our supply of clean water, both public and private. Several sources of groundwater contamination, underground storage tanks, which I'm talking about next. Septic tanks, we just talked about on-site septic systems that they leak, that can contaminate the groundwater. Holding ponds, buried items, surface spills. Anything can leak into the groundwater and can contaminate our drinking water. As we said, underground storage tanks. Some tanks were placed there on purpose. Maybe they provide fuel for the home. There was a period of time. We learn a lot in history, you guys. There was a period of time where we thought the best way to dispose of a storage tank was to bury it out of sight, out of mind, right? The problem is that steel tank corrodes. And when you have corrosion, the contents of the tank leaks. So what's in there? Is there oil? Is there petroleum? What's in there? So any leak of an underground storage tank can contaminate the soil and the groundwater. Whomever owns the property is responsible for the cleanup. It doesn't matter if you caused it. Doesn't matter how widespread it goes. If it hits your neighbor's property, your neighbor's neighbors, so on down the road. There were state and federal funds available to help with cleanup. I don't know where that status is, but there was funding available. This gets expensive. One of the best things that we can do as an agent is look for a pipe sticking up out of the yard. If you're walking somebody's land and you trip over a pipe, it's attached to something. It's probably attached to some kind of underground storage tanks. It's estimated that there are billions of unknown underground storage tanks in this country. That was with a B, by the way. Billions of unknown underground storage tanks. Again, once upon a time ago, we thought, well, I'm not using this tank anymore, so I'm just going to take it in the backyard and bury it, out of sight, out of mind. Boy, have we learned the errors of our ways. Have we learned that that's not the way to dispose? But the experts. What is stored in the, we just said gas, could be oil, anything to fuel the home. So again, there's federal and state regulations on cleanup or removal. Which should you do, cleanup or removal? They'll let the experts handle that. And we do have something called the North Carolina Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act. I wouldn't get too involved in the act. Just know that there are regulations out there. There was funding available at one point. Don't know where it's at. When it comes to underground storage tanks, our responsibility, again, if we know of an underground storage tank, we have to disclose it. And as a buyer's agent or a listing agent, when you see that pipe sticking out of the ground, we should have a red flag that goes up that asks questions. What's there? What is it? It's attached to something. If there's not a pipe, how do we know? We don't. I can only disclose what I know. The Real Estate Commission does not expect you to go out there with a metal detector looking for underground storage tanks. I can only disclose what I know. There is a fascinating story in your book on page 505. Make a note to read that after class. If you haven't already, please don't try to read it now. But it just goes to show what can happen with these out of sight, out of mind underground storage tanks. Another environmental concern, or environmental issue, I should say, is our landfills. That trash has to go somewhere. It's just about every city, every area has a landfill. So either they excavate an enormous hole, or they use one that's left over from a surface mining operation. And the thing about landfills is it has controlled drainage. So the drainage is controlled to go in a certain direction. These things are heavily regulated, federal, state, and local regulations on how they operate. If you live near a landfill, you know, hot August day, You walk outside and take a deep breath. It smells like trash. You know you're near a landfill. If that's something of concern to your buyer, a quick Google map, Google search will tell you where the landfill is and how far away from the home they're thinking about buying is. Another environmental issue is mold. Mold is everywhere. Y'all take a big deep breath with me. You just breathed in mold. Wasn't that good? Mold is everywhere. Mold ranges. You know the mold you get on that loaf of bread you've had too long? Mold ranges from bread mold to black toxic mold and everything in between. There's a lot out there about mold. I'm sure it would surprise you. So mold can be found anywhere. All it needs is an organic substance, some moisture, and a little bit of oxygen. That's all it needs to live and grow. It can grow rapidly. Long-term exposure of mold can cause respiratory problems. I think one of the big responsibilities for us as agents, not responsibilities, a piece of information for us as brokers to understand is that insurance companies no longer cover mold. There were lawsuits, and the insurance companies got tired of getting sued. So they said, you know what, we're just going to drop the coverage. So it's rare. Is it right? Is it wrong? That's not why we're here to discuss. It is what it is. So it's rare to have mold covered in insurance companies. I'm not saying you can't find it. I'm just saying it's rare. We have a duty to disclose it. If we see it, if we smell it. Have you ever walked into a basement after it's been raining and you go, this smells basement-y? You're not smelling basement. You're smelling some kind of mold or mildew, some kind of something. Some are more prone than others. Dry ventilation, that can help alleviate mold. The Real Estate Commission says that the presence of mold is not a material fact unless it's an excessive amount. Again, we need to be able to identify signs. Do you smell something? Does it smell like basement-y? Those are the things, the flags that we're looking for. What other signs? Was there a previous leak? Maybe there was a roof leak. Anytime that moisture was there, we should have a flag go up to ask questions about mold. Sellers, listing agents, we need to encourage our sellers to truthfully disclose anything regarding water issues. But guys, keep in mind the seller can't disclose what they don't know. So if they haven't been in the basement in 20 years, they haven't been in the attic in 5 years, that happens. They may not know. They can only disclose what they know. Once they know about it, we need to encourage them to disclose it. Are y'all afraid to breathe? There's some scary stuff in this unit, isn't there? Stuff we're dealing with every day. Maybe you needed me to tell you about it. Maybe we didn't. With mold, there's a continuing education class. Once you get your license, if you're looking for some CE topics, there's a continuing education class out there called The Truth About Mold. You could spend 4 hours learning about mold. And let me tell you something, it's actually pretty interesting. Did you know there was enough about mold you could talk about it for 4 hours? Not all mold is anything to get excited about. You're not going to burn the house down when you got mold on your bread, right? Just throw that loaf of bread away. Go get you some fresh bread. Okay. So wrapping up Unit 20. Again, we're just scratching surfaces, having a basic understanding. Federal and North Carolina both have laws that address different environmental issues. One law that regulates all this is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERCLA. They provide funding when environmental issues happen. Again, there's funding available. And wherever the source is, the owner is going to be responsible for it. So again, we talked about the underground storage tank. It might be that that leaking oil has traveled to the lot next door to that, next door to that, next door to that. Where did the source come from? Whomever owns that property. And just to point out in your book, there's different acts that fall under CERCLA. So page 510 to 511 are just the different acts and the things that they address. So there's your Leaky Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Act, Coastal Area Management, Mountain Ridge, Dredge and Fill. So let's bring this home to us. What's our liability when it comes to environmental issues? Understand the seller carries the most liable. What can we get in trouble for? Failure to disclose or improperly disclosing. Once you know about something, you can't unknow it. So once you learn about an environmental issue on a property, we have a duty to disclose it. We're going to talk all about these material facts getting into Unit 7. When it comes to environmental issues, my job is not to discover unless I have a flag go up. Again, if you trip over a pipe in the backyard, I'd ask some questions about that. If the house smells basement-y, I would ask some questions about that. Always have your red flag ready to go. And once we learn about something, we have to disclose it. Appraisers follow similar liabilities. Home inspectors, anybody that's going to be in the components of the home, they have their flags up too, looking for some of these issues, environmental issues. Unit 20, short, sweet, and to the point. Those key terms on page 497. Key point review, 512 to 514. And the student quiz, 515 to 516. Will you see a question or two from Unit 20? Yes. Have a basic understanding of these environmental issues. Any questions?
As long as we disclose what we know and we do, our walking the grounds and stuff, we are not liable for anything we have not detected, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
As we said earlier, the homeowners, they're the ones that carry the most liability with this. But I do have a duty to ask questions. I do have a duty to disclose what I know.
Yeah.
You
so
cannot bury your head in the sand and say, nope, that's the seller's job. I disclose what I know. Sorry, James, what?
Yeah, so if there's a 6-foot pipe sticking up from the ground, we kind of got to go, this probably leads to something, so we need to,
It's attached to something, that's right. And don't look at your seller and say, oh, just get you a funnel and some kitty litter, you'll be fine. Underground storage tanks don't work that way. Questions? Unit 20? Y'all ready to get outside now, aren't you? You don't want to breathe this air that you're breathing. Change your furnace filter. That's right. Ask, ask, ask. How do we get answers? How do we get to the bottom of things? We ask questions. And that's where we're heading in Unit 7 and 8. How many of you guys looked ahead at Unit 7 before today? I hope I see lots of hands. Not as many as I was hoping for. All right. Unit 7 is tricky, you guys, whether you looked at it or not. If you looked at it, you got an advantage. If you can't breathe out of your nose anyway, right? You're good. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to Kahoot, and then we're going to get into Unit 7. So let's take 10, we'll Kahoot, and then we'll get started on Unit 7.
I do have a quick question for you.
Sure.
You were talking about the oh, hang on, I gotta go back to my notes. I completely forgot. The carbon monoxide poisoning
Mhm.
about in Boone. Did you hear? I think it was 2 years ago in South Carolina where a family of like 5 went to bed one night and their cat just started going nuts. And after about a half an hour, they finally went outside and just took the cat outside. And later, when they had an inspection done, they realized that there was so much carbon monoxide in the house that if they would have gone to sleep that night, they would have died.
Oh
That the
my
cat, for some reason,
gosh.
the cat went nuts and ended up saving their lives.
Thank God for the cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, pay attention to your pets. They're like designed to warn us about stuff. That's an amazing story, James. Thank you. Thank God for that cat. That's crazy. So if you don't have a cat, go get, even if you do have a cat, go get that that
Get a
carbon
cat.
monoxide detector. Absolutely. All right, everybody get something warm? It's a challenge here lately, isn't it? All right. So I'm going to take attendance and we're going to Kahoot. I'll talk about how we Kahoot. So hang on with me for 1 second. If you're back, cameras are on and I can see you twofold. Okay, so Kahoot. We're going to do Kahoot on units 4, 5, and 6. And give me a second to pull it up. Either going to go to the website, the app, or we discovered the QR code, which I kind of like. That gets you guys in faster. It gets you what you need to do. So one or the other. Step 1, get your phone. Step 2, either got kahoot.it, the website, you got the app, or you just click on or scan the QR code. That QR code should pull you up to this game. If you're doing the app or the website, you put in the game pin 254409 at the top of my screen here. Thank you for telling me you're back from break. If you miss attendance, please tell me you're back. Once you put in your game pin, it's going to ask you for a name. All I ask is that you keep it clean. If your phone goes to sleep, it'll kick you out. Just make sure your phone stays awake. I'll give you a few more seconds to get in if you want to play. For some reason you don't want to play on your phone, you can always play in your mind. You can always send me a direct message, not one to everybody. About if you think it's red, green, yellow, or blue. Okay. Anybody in that wants to play? You already Kahoot? Units 4, 5, and 6. So be a good refresher from last week. Let's Kahoot. Question number 1, the system of legal description that defines a parcel of land by the parameter is? Ten seconds. I just have to play in your mind today. So system of legal description defines a parcel of land by the parameters. Good job, guys. Meets and bounds. Remember, meets and bounds, you start at the point of beginning. It's a tour of the property. You work your way around the parameter of the monument to monument to monument. So I don't know. I see some of you are having a hard time getting in. I apologize. You can always still play in your mind though, right? You can send me a direct message what you think the answer is. So meets and bounds gives us the parameter, the tour of the parameter. It's the one we use most common, most often in North Carolina. Questions on this one? Okay. So who got it right the fast? Yeah.
We can go back to Kahoot and go over this too, right? Yeah. Like the quizzes, right?
I believe so. If you have the app, I believe so.
Right. Okay.
I don't see what you see, so.
All right, no problem. Okay. I'm gonna look. Thank you.
All right. So who answered it not only right, but who answered it fastest? Remember, that's how it ranks us. So Anu was the fastest, followed by Angela and Tara, Alex and William. Question number 2. In North Carolina real estate transaction, excise taxes are the responsibility of the ten seconds. Real estate transaction, who pays excise taxes? The sellers. The sellers pay excise tax. Remember, that's that tax that they charge to sell a property. If your purchase price isn't 500ths, then you round up to the nearest 500ths and divide by 500. You guys remember that? End of unit 5. If not, if that was brand new information, then that's all at the end of unit 5. As many years as I've been cahooting, I have never had anybody answer the real estate answer. This is the first time I've ever had. Y'all crack me. You're like, I don't know what it is, but I know I'm not paying it. I've only had, whoever you are the first. So the seller pays, I love the confession, thank you. So the seller pays excise tax. Again, we're going to talk more about seller's responsibilities at settlement, buyer's responsibilities at settlement. Our contract to closing process is unit 21. So we'll see that. So Tara, bumped up the top, Alex, Dawn, Valen, and Meg. Our top 5 so far. Question number 3. Which of the following deeds contains no express or implied warranties? Ten seconds. What deed has no express or implied warranties is our quitclaim deed. No warranties with a quitclaim deed. What you got, what I got, you get. So if I got nothing, what you get? Absolutely nothing. So we talked about a quitclaim deed is going to be used maybe to create an easement, maybe to fix a mistake. Maybe somebody's name was spelled wrong. General warranty deed has the most warranties. It has the most covenants. Watch those big old clunky fingers when you're hitting that button. That's the one thing I wish they would change on Kahoot, is allow you to go back and change your answer. But Kahoot's never called me and asked me what I think. So just be really careful on which one you're touching, because you can't change it. So let's see. Now we got Tara staying on top, Valen, Jody, William, Meg is on fire this round. Answer streak of 3. Question number 4. Which of the following is an essential element of a valid North Carolina deed? Ten seconds. Central element of a valid North Carolina deed. Yep, we always got to go back and look at this one. So let's go back to page, let's see, page 87. Page 87. We have our essential elements of a valid North Carolina deed. What are the things required in order for a judge to deem this deed as valid? So that's what you're looking at on page 87. Of this list, we see words of conveyance. The grantor has to, in some way, state their intention to convey the property to the grantee. Flip over to page 88. And there are the elements that are not required. They're the sprinkles on the cake. Deeds are valid even though they're not recorded. Who is it that tells us we have to record? Seeing mouths go. Connor is who says we have to record. There we go. Connor says we have to record. Is everybody good with this? It doesn't have to be sealed. The grantee doesn't sign it. Who signs it?
Daddy.
The grantor. So you guys make a note, pages 87 to 88. A suggestion was you do a side-by-side comparison. What are essential elements of a valid deed? What are elements that are not required? Questions on this one? This is why I like to Kahoot right here. Right here.
Yes,
Yeah.
Julie. I'm looking at it, and I guess when I was going over it, study says the deed must be in writing. That doesn't consider recordation, right?
Your
That's what
book is
got
in
me.
writing. Your book is in writing. Your book is not recorded down at the public courthouse.
Okay, got you.
You with me?
Yes, ma'am.
So
All right.
the deed has to be in writing, absolutely. Connor takes it a step further and says that we have to record it. Why? So it's enforceable against third parties. Diego second guessed himself. Very common, Diego. Hopefully we're learning. Guys, most of the time, we'll talk about this as we get closer to test preparation. If you haven't discovered it already, most of the time your gut answer is right. Have you guys changed a right answer to wrong yet? If you haven't, you will. So think about that before you go out changing your answers. Yep. Yep. Very common. Questions on this question? Everybody good? 87 and 88. This is why I like to Kahoot. So this could shake things up a bit. Let's see what we got. Jody's on top and News on fire this round with 4 correct in a row. Drew, Bob, and Tara. So it shook things up a bit. Question number 5, restrictive covenants. Five seconds. Good job. Restrictive covenants are pertinent, which means they apply to and bind all successive owners of the property. The first owner follows the covenants, the second owner, the 5th owner, the 20th owner, so on. Okay. Once the developer's gone, the covenants stay. The developer leaves their covenants behind. Questions? Boy, that did not budge, did it? All right, last question is going to be a fight for the top. I think the last question. See, Najavi's our highest climber this round, came up 6 places. Oh, 2 more. The primary intent of zoning ordinances is to ten seconds. Primary intent of zoning ordinances is to control the use of land and structure. It's a public land use control. Zonings help regulate how we use the land and how the structures are on the land. There is no statewide zoning. Remember, zoning is local in nature. Winston has their zoning, Cornersville has their zoning, Greensboro has their zoning. Zoning doesn't protect residential neighborhoods. from commercial encroachments. They may throw in a buffer zone. Oh, thank you, Nahavi. Thank you. Did I do that right this time, Nahavi? Okay. Question? Or accidental unmute? Good. Thank you. So we got Anu creeping back up top, Drew, Valan, Bob, and Jody. Still the same top 5, just switched up a bit. Anu's the one on fire this round, 6 in a row. Now our last one. Which of the following best describes a variance? Ten seconds. Which of the following best describes a variance? And a variance is an exception to the zoning ordinance. Remember, within a variance, how many homeowners are going to the zoning board asking permission to break the rules? How many? You can show me on your hand. How many? Just one. One homeowner is going to the zoning board and saying, because of your zoning, I can't use my property. I have a unique hardship that affects me and only me. Please break the rules. Please make an exception. Questions? All right, let's see. Remember the dramatic conclusion, the platform. So our third place winner is Valen. Good job. Second place winner is Jolie. Where'd she come from? Good job. And our first place winner is Anu. Yay. I think it's fourth, fifth. Oh, my Zoom bar is in the way. Bob and Brenda are our fourth and fifth place. Questions? Do we like to Kahoot? I only do it if you guys find it helpful. If not, we're just wasting time. But hopefully it takes us away from monotony of the book. Kind of a good recap of things that we've talked about. Okay. All right. Unit 7. Unit 7, we probably will not get through Unit 7 this week. We're going to spend a lot of time in Unit 7. I've spent the last roughly 2 weeks getting through 7 units. Now we're going to spend like the next couple classes, next couple weeks on 7, 8, 9, and 10. I feel like Unit 7, 8, these are our relationships, our agency and brokerage relationships. I feel like that's why you guys think you signed up for this class. How can I be an agent? How can I work with buyers and sellers? So now we're getting into the really good meat of it. This is the stuff you're going to encounter every single day. At least every day you want to work with buyers and sellers. Okay. These units, the heavy concentration is on residential sales. I do have a unit dedicated to property management. We'll talk about that in Unit 12. So the primary concentration is residential, but please understand brokerage and the law of agency applies if you're doing residential, you're doing commercial, you're doing property management. It doesn't matter what you're doing. We still have this law of agency. So in Unit 7, we're going to explain all types of agency. We're going to talk about something called a fiduciary relationship. We're going to distinguish between customers and clients and the duties that we owe each. There are things that I owe my customers. There are different things that I owe my clients. So we're going to define our roles. And then we're going to talk about how we disclose our agency status. I have to caution consumers who I represent, where my best interest lies. And I do that through my agency disclosure. Okay, so before we put your book off to the side for a second, let's just have a conversation about some main points that I think if you can wrap your brain around them now, it'll help you get through this material. So book off to the side for a second. Let's just have a conversation about things that we're getting ready to see in the next couple units. And the first is this Latin principle called caveat emptor. North Carolina is a caveat emptor state. Caveat emptor means let the buyer beware. It is the buyer's responsibility to know what's going on with the property before they buy it. The seller is under no obligation to disclose anything. There are some exceptions, like for example, lead-based paint. So the buyers are the one responsible for learning about the property before they buy. When the buyer hires an agent, that agent takes on that responsibility with them. So as a buyer's agent, I'm helping them I'm helping them learn about the property before they buy. The relationship with the principal, the relationship with the client, the relationship with the seller and the buyer is with the firm. The seller hires the firm. The buyer hires the firm. The owner in a property management hires the firm, not the individual agent. Every single one of us in this industry run around talking about my buyer and my seller. You will too, I promise. To get you through the test, you need to understand it's not your seller. It's not your buyer. It's the firm's. We'll define principal in just a second. As we mentioned earlier, homes in North Carolina are sold as is. First off, let me just get this out there. There's no such thing as a perfect home. What? Yeah, all homes have some kind of problem. Even brand new construction that they just hung the doors. There is problems. There's no such thing as a perfect home. And all homes are sold as is, which means there are some things that the seller is required to disclose, but the seller's not required to do any repairs. It's entirely up to the seller if they're going to do repairs or not. They don't have to. The buyer has choices. We'll talk about those buyer's choices. In a situation where buyer and seller are working with a firm, the seller pays the commission, typically to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever brings the buyer. Is it an agent in the same firm? We'll talk about that scenario. Is an agent with a different firm? So the seller typically pays the commission to the listing firm. The listing firm shares their commission with whomever the buyers come from. An exemption to this rule, for example, might be the for sale by owner. The for sale by owner didn't hire a firm. The for sale by owner chose to go it alone. They may or may not pay commission. We will talk about how you get paid. Don't worry. Talk all about commission in Unit 8. My job as an agent is to help them find the facts. I cannot make decisions for my sellers or buyers. I cannot look at them and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I provide the facts, they make the decisions. All I can do is help educate them on matters that are relevant to the transaction. I can't make anybody do anything. The last thing to discuss before we get into Unit 7 is just to make sure the terminology. We'll see this more in Unit 8, so we'll refresh in Unit 8 The people working for the buyer is known as the buyer's agent or the buyer's firm. They could also be referred to as the selling agent and the selling firm. They are the ones selling the property to the buyer. Those working with the seller are the seller's agent or the seller's firm, also referred to as the listing agent and the listing firm. Listing firm and selling firm is the verbiage that we see on our agency agreements, our contracts with the buyer and seller. We'll get into those agency agreements in Unit 8. So again, we'll see this more in Unit 8, but just to get you guys to start wrapping your brains around this, the selling firm is working with who? They're working with the buyer. The seller's firm is working with who? They're working with the seller. So we got to speak in proper terminology, and we have to be able to know what our forms are asking. So that gets us warmed up. So let's start on page 134. And let's start with talking about defining the law of agency. The law of agency governs how we represent other people. And it's important to understand that the law of agency is not one law. It's compiled of several different laws. The common law of agency came from the early days of England, when everybody served a king. That's our common law of agency. Contract law, court rulings, court law have helped shape the law of agency over the years. We have North Carolina real estate license law. There's laws that regulate our license, and within those laws, it tells us how to work with others. And then there's the North Carolina Real Estate Commission rule. And we'll talk more about license law and commission rule. Now that we're in the meat of the class, we're going to talk more and more about license law and commission rule. License law, I'm referring to North Carolina Real Estate License Law. Commission rule, I'm referring to North Carolina Real Estate Commission rule. On page 135, make yourself a note to look at it after class if you haven't. But there's a story, the Addendum story, that talks about how agency came to be, how we know it today. So let's back up for a minute. Let's go back in time and let's talk about how agency in real estate looked before the Addendum law changed things. And I'll talk about the Addendum law in just a second. It used to be, before Addendum came along, it used to be that all sellers were represented, no buyers were represented. Buyers in real estate transactions didn't have representation. They were going it alone. We'll talk more about represented or unrepresented. To envision buying a house before buyer's agency, think about going car shopping. If you're going car shopping, you go to a lot, the sales guy approaches you and says, hey, you want to buy a car? You look around the lot, you know that salesman represents the car dealership, right? You know that that salesman has the best interest of that car dealership. As the buyer of that car, what do you do if you look around the lot and you don't see anything on the lot that you like? What do? You go on to the next lot, right? That was very similar to real estate before we had buyer's agency. Buyers went around looking for houses. They went looking for houses for sale in firms. And if the firm didn't have it, they moved on to the next firm. Agents weren't representing the buyers. Agents weren't taking the time or the energy to help a buyer find a home because their time and energy was spent on the sellers. So this Addendum law case, I think it was, I don't remember exactly when it was, not important. There was a buyer that sued this Addendum real estate company because they felt during the transaction that that agent had their best interest. They felt that the agent represented them. And as it turns out, they were getting some not factual information, transaction closed. And they said, well, why did they tell me? And they said, because they didn't represent you. So this lawsuit started. And once this first lawsuit happened, you guys know how that goes. You know, several other people then stood up and said, oh yeah, I got a lawsuit too. And this huge case evolved. Adena Real Estate lost, and we're talking to the tune of almost $20 million, because they were acting like buyer's agents when they didn't have any buyer representation. Their loyalty was the seller. They did a disservice to their sellers, and they thought they were helping. Because of this Adena lawsuit is what caused other states to revisit their agency. And it's from Adena that North Carolina adopted buyer agency and agency disclosure. Guys, buyer agency in North Carolina and agency disclosure has only been around since like the mid-90s. It's not that old. It's not that long ago. You very well may encounter an agent in your career that remembers life in this state before buyer's agency. It's important to know that not all states have buyer's agency. Why is that important? Maybe you're going to move to another state. Maybe you have a friend moving to another state. Don't assume that because you know North Carolina state law that you know anything. You know North Carolina state law. What do you know? You know what's happening in North Carolina only. If you're not sure how Florida works, you need to go to the Florida Real Estate Commission and discover Florida state law. Does that make sense to everybody? North Carolina does have buyer agency now, but not always. Any questions so far? How we came to be where we are, why we're here today?
You're talking about that lawsuit. I was reading about that on Sunday and went and searched for some of those articles, and there were multiple, not just with them, but after that there were multiple lawsuits and stuff. But not only did they lose that 20 million, but a lot of real estate agents ended up having legal action put against them, and it was very, very tough for them. It was not fun.
It got nasty, right? Yep. And again, I think that was up in Minnesota, I think. So again, it didn't directly impact North Carolina, but after this, North Carolina said, whoa, 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 we got to look at this. We've got to revisit this because it was a big deal. And like you said, agents of that company, I'm sorry, buyers of that company, buyers all over the world were going, huh, I thought my agent had my best interest too. And come to find out, they weren't represented. Thank you. So as we mentioned earlier, North Carolina, we are a caveat emptor state. Let the buyer beware. It's so important that we know what this means. In North Carolina, the burden of discovery, the burden of investigating the property, the burden of learning about the property is on who? It's on the buyer. The seller doesn't have a duty to disclose most things. There are a few things they have to disclose. Most things the sellers don't have to disclose. When we get into Unit 8, we're going to talk about some seller disclosures. Sellers have choices. When it comes to sellers disclosures, they can say yes, no, or no representation. They don't have to disclose anything. They can say no representation. The one thing the sellers can never, ever, ever do is lie. This does not give the seller an out. So we'll see those seller disclosures in Unit 8. Let the buyer beware. The onus is on who to learn about the property before they buy? It's on the buyer. And again, when the buyer hires an agent, I'm taking on that responsibility with them because they're represented. So let's talk about this fiduciary. Fiduciary is a relationship of trust. When we enter into relationships with the principal, they know that they should be able to trust us. They know that we should have their best interest in mind when they hire us. Guys, my principal's best interest needs to be before my own. As we're going to learn in this unit, self-interest is a conflict. The principal should know that I have their best interest in mind, even before my own sometimes. Fiduciary is a relationship of trust. So on page 137, we start defining some words. Yes, we need to know what these words mean. Agency is the fiduciary relationship between the principal and the firm. Agency is the fiduciary relationship between the firm and the principal. All of my PowerPoints are on Learn Test Pass up through Unit 10. So is 7 there? Yes, you should be able to log on and see it. The principal and the client are used interchangeably. Both mean the same. The principal is the client is the principal. The principal client is the individual that hires the firm. They hire the firm using an agency agreement. Now remember, we're going to get all into agency agreements in Unit 8. We are hired by the principal to do a very specific job. The listing agreement, I'm being hired to list and sell your property. The buyer's agency agreement, I'm being hired to help you locate and purchase a property. The property management agreement, I'm being hired to manage your property. The principal is hiring the firm for a specific reason, specific thing. The agent is the individual who is authorized by the firm to work with their client. The agent is the individual who is authorized by their firm to work with that client. A subagent is an agent of an agent. We're going to talk all about subagency in just a bit, so you may want to put that one off to the side for just a second. We'll get there. Right now, let's just know a subagent is an agent of an agent. The word sub, the prefix sub means under, right? So if you're a subagent, you're an agent under an agent of an agent. We'll spend more time on that. The customer is the third party in the transaction. Either you are my client or you are my customer. If you hire me, you're my client. If you don't hire me, you're my customer. So let's say, for example, I'm the listing agent. Why do I get to be the listing agent? Because the seller hired my firm using the exclusive right to sell listing agent agreement. Seller hired the firm allows me to work with that seller. If I'm the listing agent, that means the buyer in the transaction is my customer. Maybe they're unrepresented. Maybe they're represented by another firm, but they're not represented by my firm. So in that scenario, the seller is the client, the buyer is the customer. Flip that coin. I have a buyer's agency agreement, which means the buyer hires the firm to let them find the property. The buyer's interested in seeing 123 Main Street. My firm does not represent 123 Main Street. In that scenario, the buyer is my client, the seller is my customer. We do have cases where we can have two clients in the same transaction, where the firm represents both seller and buyer, in the same transaction. It's called dual agency. We don't get there today. Probably won't get there today. We will get there on Thursday. Question came in about a provisional broker and a subagent, two different things. Separate those. We'll talk about a subagent later. The last thing we have here is a facilitator transactional broker. This is a non-agency relationship in which both parties are customers. Nobody's represented. Transactional broker is not allowed in North Carolina. In North Carolina, if you're involved in a transaction, it's because at least one of the parties is represented. I actually had this case the other day. One of my teammates called me and said, for sale by owner and an unrepresented buyer. For sale by owner means they're going it alone, right? For sale by owner means they haven't hired a firm. And then the buyer was unrepresented and the agent said, can I help them? And I said, not North Carolina, because that would make you a transactional broker. That's a non-agency. They said, well, how can I help them? I said, one of them needs to hire you. One of them needs to become your client. Now you can get involved. Questions so far? Again, just put sub-agency off to the side. We'll definitely come back to that. Questions on everything else so far? So again, making sure we're hearing the terminology. I know sometimes to hear the terminology, we need to see the terminology. The principal of the client is represented. They're represented by the firm that they hired. How did they hire that firm? They entered into an agency agreement. The customer is the third party that's not represented. If you're not my client, you are my customer. If you don't hire me, you are my customer. And I have duties and obligations to both. We're getting ready to talk about what those duties and obligations are. So the principal is represented, the customer is unrepresented. Terminology that we're understanding. So client versus customer. The agent and the firm work for the client. They work with the customer. My end goal is to get everybody to the finish line, right? And in real estate, what's the finish line? Let's get that new deed recorded. That's the last act. That's the very last thing that happens is we get that deed on record. And that's my goal, is to get them to settlement, get them to closing where we can record that new deed. So we work for the client, we work with the customer. That's right, the customer may be represented by somebody else. If somebody else represents the customer, they are their client and my guy is their customer, right? If you ever want to know who you represent, look and see the relationship with the firm. I don't care about another firm. I care about the relationship with my firm. Okay, good. So my mentor uses this analogy of an airplane. I've borrowed it from her and she knows I borrow it. So it's not like I'm stealing or anything. She knows I do this. She says, use it, Jules, that's fine. I said, okay. So when I think about client and customer, I think about an airplane. Let's say you are the pilot of the airplane. The firm is the pilot of the airplane. You're going to put your client in first class. You're going to put your customer back in coach. Are we all getting from point A to point B at the same time? Is it the firm's responsibility to get everybody in that plane safely to our destination? Sure. The difference is what? The difference is the level of service that you receive in between. I hear first class is really nice. You get what? Some champagne, warm towel, maybe a hot meal. Let me tell you about flying coach. You get unsalted pretzels and a lukewarm Coca-Cola. Are we still all getting from point A to point B? Yes, that's the job of the firm. When you put people in your plane, that's your responsibility. The difference between client and customer is the level of service that's received in between. The firm's flying a plane. Everybody good so far? Let's see some thumbs ups. Okay, good, good, good. Yeah, please don't. I guess in that sense, sometimes they do. I wish I could tell you everything you put under contract is going to close. Not everything closes. It's not a done deal until that new deed is put on record. The best advice I can have for you guys is to not to spend that money, that commission check, until it's in your hand. Okay. So let's start talking about, we're going to talk about duties that I owe my client, my first class riders, and then we're going to talk about duties that I owe my customer, my coach. So when we're talking about duties to our clients, one way we can remember those duties that we owe our principal or our client is remembering old car. What we're going to do the next few slides is break old car down. Use old car to help you remember the duties that you owe your principal, the duties that you owe your client. So we're going to take old car. Actually, we're going to take a break. And then when we come back from break, we're going to break down old car. Any questions to this point? Everybody good so far? All right, so let's take 10. And come back, old car. Okay. So as I've mentioned, we're not going to get through 7 today. Obviously, we'll keep going on it Thursday when we come together. If we get through 7 on Thursday, we're just going to get started on Unit 8. So if not, then we'll get going in Unit 8 next week. 7 is deep, you guys. 7 is thick. So spend some time with Unit 7 if you haven't already. Camera's on, where I can see you, twofold. Taking attendance right now. So, old car. Let's talk about old car and what this means. Big picture says old car. This is what I owe my clients. Once somebody hires the firm, once they hire us, we owe them certain duties and responsibilities, and old car helps us keep that in check, keep that in point. So let's break down old car. The O in old car stands for obedience. The broker and the firm are to act in good faith at all times. We are to follow the commands of our clients. We are to follow their lawful instructions. Please note the word lawful. Nobody can make me break the rules. What rules am I referring to? Start with license law and commission rule. We're going to start getting more and more into license law and commission rule. One rule we've already talked about, I have a duty to disclose material facts. Do we hear what I'm saying? Remember we just said, what does the seller have to disclose? What is the seller required to disclose? Other than the fact if there's lead, if there's no presence of known lead in the home, right? Oh, I forgot to look at that addendum. Crap, I'll make a note to do it on Thursday. Sorry about that. So we'll look at the lead-based paint. So the seller, for the most part, doesn't have to disclose anything. As we're going to learn when we get into material facts, I do. So even if the seller says, my roof leaks, shh, don't tell anybody, I have to follow their lawful instructions, and that is not a lawful instructions. License law and commission rule is going to trump the seller's instructions. Everybody with me? Again, this is what we're getting into. These are the things we're going to start breaking down. So you all know what your lawful instructions are. So if you're obedient to your principal or your client, you're acting in good faith at all times, and you're following their lawful instructions. The L, an old car, is loyalty. I am loyal to my principal. I have to place my principal's interest above all others, sometimes including myself. I need to be very sensitive to any conflicts of interest. We'll talk more about this when we get to material facts. Remember, I'm not the one buying this house. I'm not the one selling this house. I'm here to simply guide the buyer and the seller properly through the transaction. And I'm loyal to my clients. So we're loyal. We're placing our principal's interest above all others, including our own sometimes. The D in old car is to disclosure. We need to keep our principal informed at all times about any facts that may influence their decision to buy or sell. What if you hear the seller is willing to sell for less? Maybe they're willing to go under asking price. I have to disclose that to my buyer. What if I hear the buyer's willing to negotiate their original offer price? I have to disclose that to my seller. I keep my principal informed at all times about any facts that may influence their decision. And I have a duty to disclose material facts. You're going to hear me say this many times. I never have a reason not to disclose material facts. In this case, we're talking about disclosing material facts to a client, but guess what? I also have a duty to disclose material facts to my customer. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. And again, we'll talk more about those in just a second. So specifically, when we talk about disclosure, let's break this down a little bit and make sure we're all good. When you're talking about sellers, if you're the listing agent, I have a duty to present all offers. I have a duty to present which offers? Every single one of them. What if it's a low ball offer that's going to assault them and make them mad? Do I have to disclose that to my seller? Everybody shake your head, yes. What if it's an offer to, I'm just throwing stuff out there, to do a 2-year lease to own? Do I have to disclose that to my seller? Everybody shake your head, yes. We disclose all, every single one of them, all offers to our sellers. We disclose the ability of the purchaser to complete the transaction at a higher price. If you find out they're pre-approved for more, if you find out they're willing to pay more, I need to share that with my seller. I need to disclose that to my seller. What if you learn about the buyer's intentions to buy the property, turn around and sell it for a profit? I have to disclose that to my seller. Maybe they don't know there's a rezoning amendment on the table that could increase the value. If you find out, you have to disclose it to your seller. When you're talking about disclosing to your buyer, we disclose any known deficiencies about the property. Anytime you learn about anything wrong, there is something wrong. Once you find out about it, we disclose that to our buyer. Again, we're going to talk about the buyer's purchasing process and their right to do investigations and inspections, and the right to terminate if they're not satisfied with their inspections and investigations. We'll get into that in Unit 10. I also disclose to my buyer anything that could affect the property's value or desirability. Again, maybe the zoning amendment on the table is going to go the other way. Maybe it's going to bring down the value of the neighborhood. Do you think that's information I should share with my buyer? Absolutely. You know, it's funny to say this, but when you're with buyers, we need to talk to them about resale. They haven't even bought the dang property yet. We're talking about how's this going to look in 2 years, 15 years when you go to sell them. Get them thinking ahead. Any information on the property that could affect the buyer's negotiation power. For example, right now, inventory is low. Homes are going quickly. They're going under contract within a day or two for the most part. That wasn't always the case. The market we're in right now is not the market that we were in 10 years ago. And one thing when we were getting into this market, one thing that I noticed was the shift in the conversations. You know, prior to getting into this market, it wasn't uncommon to see a house that was for sale for, I don't know, a week, a month, 4 months. Nobody thought anything about it. And then we get in this market and homes were flying off the shelves. We couldn't keep it. They're going under contract under a day or two. You know what buyers are saying now when they see a home that's been on the market for a week, 7 days, 5 days? They're going, what's wrong with it? What do you mean what's wrong with it? It's only been on the market for 5 days. I get their point. If you know there's an abnormal days on market, you should have a flag that goes up to ask questions, right? In this market, why has something been listed for a week? In this market, something wrong, potentially. These are things we disclose to our buyer. Any questions about old? Obedience, loyalty, disclosure. Okay, Let's talk about car. The C in car is confidentiality. There's certain personal information about the principal that I can't disclose without their permission. This does not apply to material facts. Question came in: outside of this market, how long does it take? It depends. Like I said, 8 years ago, a home could be on the market for 4 months before it raised any flags. You guys with me? Every single market is different. So we have a duty to owe, we owe our clients confidentiality. There are certain things, personal things, that I cannot disclose without their permission. For example, motivation. What's your motivation for selling? What's your motivation for buying? That's nobody's business. I owe you that confidentiality. As the listing agent, I know generally how low the seller is willing to go, how far under asking price the seller is willing to go. I owe them the confidentiality. The seller trusts that I'm not calling the buyer and saying, I know we're listed for this amount, but I know if you come in 10,000 under, my seller will accept it. You guys see this importance of confidentiality? If my seller tells me that, they have to trust that I'm not sharing that unless I have their permission. I had listing a couple years ago. I'm going to get to that. Please stay with me here. I had a listing a couple years ago, and before they called me, they were for sale by owner. So they've been doing about 5 months on their own unsuccessfully. They got fed up, threw their hands up in the air and said, we're going to call an agent. And I happened to be the one they called. Great. Got their property listed. I had it listed for about 2 weeks. Again, we weren't quite in this market just yet. We were getting into it, but 2 weeks was not a big deal back in the day when I had this listing. But my guys were frustrated because they hadn't been at it for 2 weeks. They had been at it for 6 months and 2 weeks, right? Because they tried it on their own before they called me. They called me after 2 weeks frustrated. I was like, what is going on with these people? We've only been on the market for 2 weeks. She said, will you please go into the remarks, the public remarks, and put super highly motivated seller. I said, no, I'm not going to put super highly motivated seller, because let's talk about that. Can we all agree all sellers are motivated? All sellers have some kind of motivation. They got a sign in the front yard, right? But what are you telling buyers when you advertise motivated sellers? What are you telling buyers? Just bring me something. Bring me an offer. We'll figure it out. Just bring me something. So I said, no, we're not going to go as far as to say super highly motivated seller, but I will say motivated seller once you send me an email giving me your permission to advertise your property, to advertise that you are a motivated seller. You guys see how that could negatively impact their negotiation power? Pretty much what you're telling the buyer is, bring me something, we'll figure it out. I'm willing to go under asking price. And I couldn't do that without their permission. If you got verbal, you got nothing. Verbal does not stand up in a court of law. So what would make it stand up in a court of law? An email from my seller saying, I'm okay if you put motivated seller in the public remarks. I couldn't disclose that without their permission. Everybody good with that? And even with her permission, I was still not putting super highly motivated. I mean, my God, just bring us anything, right? At that point, super highly motivated. No, we're not going there. So when it comes to confidentiality, you tell your client everything about your customer. You tell your customer nothing about your client. Who hired you? Who hired your firm, I should say? Who hired your firm? The client. Who do I owe confidentiality to? The client. So when I'm presenting an offer, if I know anything about the buyer customer, I have a duty to share that with my client. I tell my client everything about my customer. I tell my customer nothing about my client. Okay, so the C is confidentiality. The A in CAR is accounting. We have a duty to account for all funds received from or on behalf of the principal. At some point in the transaction, it's very likely you're going to have somebody else's money in your possession. The reason I have somebody else's money in my possession, because I'm transporting it from point A to point B. And while that money is in my possession, it's my responsibility. I am addressing William's question when we get to it. Right now, I'm talking about old car. I know William had a great question, and we will talk about that when we get to material facts. I also have to maintain accurate records. We're going to talk about record retention and all that other stuff. License law and commission rule tells us that we maintain records for 3 years. We keep all records for 3 years. You guys can go ahead and write that down. We'll see it again. Every record that's related to the transaction, we keep for at least 3 years. When I have somebody else's money in my possession, I'm responsible for it. I have to account for it. In Unit 21, we're going to talk about the settlement statement. I owe it to my client to make sure that that settlement statement is accurate. And then the R in old car is reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. Remember last week we were talking about my license says I can brokerage any deal if the property is located in the state of North Carolina. But just because I can, does that mean that I should? Am I doing my buyer the best interest by helping her buy a house in Wilmington? Me personally, I don't think I am. You may feel differently. This was actually a topic in one of our continuing educations a couple years ago, and it's really interesting to me how a lot of this stuff in Units 7 and 8 pops up in our CE every once in a while. Good to serve as refreshers. And specifically in our continuing education class, this is one thing where, again, just because my license says I can practice with any type of property that's located in the state of North Carolina, doesn't mean that I should. Whose best interest should I have? I should have my client's best interest. But Julie, I'd make more money if I brokerage that deal in Wilmington. I hear you, but remember, we have our principal's best interest above all others, sometimes even our own. Could you make more money if you brokeraged it? Yeah. Are you properly representing your client? That's something you have to answer. Me personally, I would refer that buyer to an agent in Wilmington and collect a referral fee. That's my personal. I'm not versed in commercial. I'm not familiar with commercial transactions. My bestie calls me and wants to buy a commercial building in Winston. I have a decision to make. Do I just go, jump in feet first and learn as I go? Do I refer it? Do I try to work it with a commercial agent? You have choices, you guys, and you need to determine. I can't answer that for you. You need to determine reasonable skill, care, and diligence. We're going to talk about your paying and referral fees and how much in Unit 8. We'll talk about commission in Unit 8. Please focus on old car. Just because I can doesn't mean that I should. I can get on I-40 this afternoon and drive 120 miles per hour. Yes? Can I not do that? Does that mean I should? I can't answer that. Things that come up, I guess, with reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we owe to the seller specifically. At some point, the seller is going to ask you, how much should I list for? How much do you think I'm going to get? Do y'all think I'm just going to blurt a number out there? Or am I going to do some research? Am I going to crunch some numbers? Am I going to do some studying to make sure that my response is an educated response? We're going to talk about all that in Unit 17, we're going to learn how we can arrive at probable sales prices. For the seller, owed to the seller, any facts about the buyer that would aid in the sellers in a decision making. Again, are they willing to offer more? Advertising, marketing the property for the seller. You know, you only get so much reach by putting a for sale sign in the front yard, right? You know how to expand the reach? I put that sucker on the internet. I tell the world, I got a house for sale at 123 Main Street. I advertise the property. I try to get any and all buyers to get the best offer for my seller. And then I'm going to help them translate the terms of the offer. What are these provisions of the offer? Again, our offer to purchase and contract is in Unit 10. So we'll talk about that. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we could owe to the buyer. Again, the buyer says, they walk in the front door, they say, oh my God, this is the one. This is the one that I've been looking for. Let's write it up. Julie, how much should I offer? Am I going to just blurt a number out there? I say, oh, offer asking price, or everybody's offering. There's this formula of 10% less than asking price. That formula doesn't exist, by the way. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to crunch some numbers. I'm going to come up with an educated response. I'm helping my buyers locate and view suitable properties. I'm having a discussion. What are you looking for? How many beds? How many baths? Do you want to be in an HOA? How close to the highway do you want to be? Do you have school preference? I'm helping them figure out what it is they want. Financing. That's one of the early conversations we have with our buyers that we'll talk about. Have you talked to a lender? If not, great. Before we go look at property, let's have you talk to maybe not just one lender, but maybe two, why not even three? All lenders are different. Let's see what different products they offer. Talking about all about financing in units 14 and 15. And then I'm helping my buyers, assisting my buyers in presenting offers. I'm assisting my buyers in writing up their offer. And once their offer is written up and signed by the buyer, I'm going to present it to the listing agent on their behalf. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence that we've talked about that we owe to both. I need to stay current in my market. I need to stay current on what's going on in the neighborhood. What are the changing laws, zoning, roads from DOT? So, gee, Julie, what's the big deal? As long as I get paid, why does it matter what they are buying or what they are selling? I don't care. I just want a paycheck. Failure to properly perform reasonable skill, care, and diligence. You could be found guilty of negligence or misconduct by the Real Estate Commission. Your client could sue you, and you could be liable for any of their damages. You may get to forfeit your compensation if the courts have deemed that you properly didn't practice reasonable skill, care, and diligence. An LL and CR is License, Law, and Commission rule. The Real Estate Commission can discipline your license. If they find you in violations of License, Law, and Commission rule, they can discipline your license. How? We're going to talk about that. So is this a big deal? I mean, I would say so. I've never been sued before, and quite frankly, I don't really want to start now. It's just me personally. So why do I follow License, Law, and Commission rule? Because I really don't want to see the inside of a courtroom. That's just me. I really don't want to face disciplinary action from the Real Estate Commission. So here's an example. Colin is a buyer's agent. He gets a request from his buyer to see a property that is 200 miles outside of the geographical area that he normally provides service. If the property is located in the state of North Carolina, can Colin show his buyer the property? He can. Should he? I'm not Colin. I can't answer that. Is Colin willing to do the work? Is Colin willing to drive 200 miles to show a property? Is he willing to go back in a couple of weeks? That's 400 miles round trip, by the way. Is he willing to go back in a couple of weeks to meet the home inspector? If he's willing to do the work, if he's willing to do the job, he'd consider it. I can't answer that for Colin. I don't know where your comfort level is. I don't know where Colin's comfort level is. I don't know where Colin's knowledge is 200 miles away. So the answer to this is, it depends. Colin is different than me, is different than you, is different than that guy over there. Is everybody with me? You need to stop and ask if it's reasonable for you. I think last week we were talking about it. Let's bring this home. Let's say you're in Winston-Salem. You're a Winston-Salem agent. You come up with a buyer that wants to see property in Greensboro. Can you? You can. Should you? That depends. If the idea of driving to Greensboro a couple times to show a couple properties and to the attorneys and to meet the home inspector, if you don't like that, then maybe you refer that buyer to an agent in Greensboro and you collect a referral fee. Reasonable skill, care, and diligence. Questions on old car?
I have two.
Okay.
Hopefully they should be short and sweet, but on confidentiality,
Mhm.
pull up the PowerPoint a second. It says, tell your client everything about the customer and tell the customer nothing about your client unless it pertains to something of legal matter, then which you it does not matter what the client wants. You have to tell the customer, something of legal matter like material fact and something like that. Correct?
This is only referring to certain information about the principal. So I always have a duty to disclose material facts. I don't care who you are. You my client, you my customer. I always have a duty to disclose material facts. So this is just referring to information that you may have about the principal.
Okay, and then the other is, so you talking about earlier about you had a buyer who wanted to take more for their house or whatever. You can do that just as long as there is some sort of evidence for it. So email, writing, as long as you have something that you can provide to the courts in case something happens. Emails, writer, paper, whatever is fine, correct? Doesn't matter what it
You're
is.
talking about the super highly motivated seller.
Yep.
Yeah. Verbal's not going to stand up in a court of law. So if you got verbal, you got nothing. So because I was on the phone with this seller and she told me what to do, what happens if it went down and we went to court? Well, they told me that I never said that. So y'all write this down. Document everything. Document everything.
Julie, I got a question
Everything.
about
I'm sorry, William,
document.
just 1 second. Let me get this point across. Because if you got verbal, you got nothing. And if you got verbal, you go stand in front of a judge. You say, well, he said this and she said that. And she told me this and he told me that. What's the judge going to say? Get out. You're wasting my time. How do you stand in front of a judge? How do you stand in front of the real estate commission if you get disciplinary? If you get your license disciplined? You have documentation. That's right, Melissa. If you didn't document it, you didn't have it. If you got verbal, you got squat. So how do you protect yourself? Document everything. Everything. Okay, William.
Yeah, it was about what you were saying about the documentation. So that example you had with the motivated seller, did you have, when you sent that, you had them sign something too as well?
He sent me an email.
Okay, and that was enough. Okay,
Yep.
gotcha.
He sent me an email.
All right.
Could she go stand in front of a judge and say, my email got hacked and I didn't say, well, I mean, sure, anything's possible, you guys. This is that what if trail we need to avoid, right?
Yeah, that was just my concern, is I know technology can be a very slippery slope, and so I didn't know if like you preferred it to be in writing so that there's no hacked or he said she said about email or whatever. So I was just
If you
curious
have
about
any concern about that, then drive over there and get them to sign something, right? If you have any concern about the validity of the documentation, then you get in your car, you drive a document over there, and you have it, put it in writing and sign. There you go. It's not what you know, it's what you prove in court. Jamie Foxx. I've never quoted Jamie Foxx in pre-licensing. Okay. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? Your documentation, again, we'll talk about disciplinary action on Thursday. Guys, if you get in trouble with the real estate commission, you think you're going to be able to call them and go, nah, I didn't do it. If you get yourself in trouble with the real estate commission, how you avoid disciplinary action is your documentation. So what are we documenting? Everything. You guys will probably hear me say this several more times. Remember, I always think my job is twofold. Get you the material you need to know to get through your state exam. Get you the material you need to know to get your license. And I want to help you keep your license once you get it. Twofold. Again, this unit, we officially get into license law and commission rule. We'll talk about that more on Thursday. You got to know the rules before you play the game, right? That's what we're doing. We're reading, learning the rules. Any other questions about old car?
Yes, I have one
Sure.
regarding the disclosure. It says on page 140 that the seller must have a completed disclosure statement.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we talked about as is, it is not necessary.
So the options for the seller on the disclosure statement, they have the option of saying, yes, there's a problem. No, there's not a problem, or no representation. The seller can choose to say no representation. The broker has a duty to disclose material facts. So when the seller says, I'm going to say no representation about my roof leaking, but shh, don't tell anybody. License law and commission rule says I have a duty to disclose material facts, even to the seller. And why doesn't the seller have to? Caveat emptor. They don't have to fix anything. They don't have to disclose much. We know they have to disclose any known lead in the home, right? That's one exception to that rule that we've talked about. Maybe we'll leave a few minutes early and I'll show you the addendum today, because I probably won't remember between now and Thursday. So that's what we'll do. Last few minutes of class, we'll go over that lead-based paint hazard addendum. OCAR. OCAR is what I owe my client. How do you become my client? Because the individual hires the firm to represent them. So if I owe my client OCAR, remember my client's in first class, right? They're getting first class treatment. If I owe my client OCAR, what do I owe my customer? My customer's back here in coach. We owe our customers honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material fact. I owe my customers honesty, fairness, and the disclosure material facts. Bottom line, nobody ever has a reason to lie. There's never a reason for anybody, me, you, buyer, seller, nobody, to lie. You need to know the difference. Clients get OCAR, customers get honesty. I can't lie, fairness. I treat everybody in the transaction the same. All the customers, I should say, in the transaction the same. And I always have a duty to disclose material facts. We're getting ready to get started on material facts in just a minute. Remember, you guys, everybody falls into two categories. They're either your client or your customer. So say, for example, the seller hires me to sell their home. The seller hires the firm. See, we all have a bad habit of doing that. The seller hires the firm to sell their home. The firm allows me to work with the seller. My advertisements, I'm putting word out to the customer, right? Does that mean I can lie in my advertising? Or do I have to be honest and fair in my advertising? You guys see what I'm saying? Because anybody that's not my client is my customer. So even if it's indirectly communicating, I have to be honest. I have to be fair. Does that make sense to everybody? We can't misrepresent a property. We cannot lie in our advertising, because who's reading those ads? A whole bunch of customers are reading those ads, possibly my client, but a whole bunch of customers. One thing we encounter quite frequently is something called puffing. Puffing is an exaggerated opinion. It's not a lie. Be very, very careful that your descriptive ads don't cross the fine line into an ad. I'm sorry, into a lie. It's one thing for me to offer my opinion. It's another thing for me to state a fact. I can't lie about the property. Let's say you're down at the coast and you're called to list this home right here. You guys see this one? You know, I might be able to say great view because there's not a lot right here, right? This is an open lot. So I might be able to say great view. Can I say oceanfront property? No, because what if somebody comes and buys this and builds a house right here? You guys see what I'm saying? So it's one thing to say great view, that's my opinion. But if I were to say oceanfront property, that's not accurate. Because why? Because the ocean is the whole way down here. I could say ocean view. I couldn't say oceanfront view. You guys hear? So puffing is an exaggeration. We all have opinions. And when it comes to writing your ads, you know, we like lots of descriptive words. We like lots of advertising. And that's where we need to understand that your puffing can't cross the line into a flat out lie, into a misrepresentation. It's an exaggerated opinion. If I were going to say best house on the block, that would be puffing. That's my opinion. If I said only house on the block, that's going to be misrepresentation, or only house that matters on the block. Question come in, does someone from your agency need to review your advertisement? That's a fantastic question. And once you get with your firms, they're probably going to help you get started to know what's allowed and what's not allowed. So your firms can help you with that. Does somebody have to review it? No. You can hit submit. You know what happens when you hit submit on the internet? It's gone. It is gone forever. Have y'all ever tried to retract anything that's gone out? It's tough, isn't it? So this is why we need to make sure that we're going to talk about advertising when we get in a licensed law and commission role. Your firm will make sure that your advertising is done properly. Agents, another one went viral down at the Outer Banks. The internet, how did they go viral? They wound up on TikTok. That's the #1 platform right now, right? I don't even know the story, but I can tell you the internet makes you go viral. Guys, every single thing we do is where? On the internet. So there's the link. You can look at it after class. Please don't look at it now. Questions about what we owe the clients, what we owe the customers. Client gets old car. You guys are looking at it now anyway. Because I'm getting ready to switch gears to an important topic, heavily tested. The link in the chat, you're not going to be tested on. All right, we've danced all around it. So let's formally meet our material facts. Before you start writing, please just hang on for 1 second. I know you guys have this burning desire to write down every single word on the PowerPoint. All those words are on page 143. But before you start writing, let me explain first off. Material fact is a very broad definition, very broad. And the broad definition of material fact is a fact that a reasonable person would recognize as relevant to making a decision. A fact that a reasonable person, who's reasonable, I don't know, would recognize as something that's relevant when making a decision. Well, gee, how helpful is that? Not much. So what the Real Estate Commission has done is taken that very broad definition and they've compiled it into specifics. They help us out by giving us specifics. So specifically, what are material facts? A material fact is any fact about the property itself. Structural issues, high radon levels, the leaky basement, the lead, any fact about the property itself. Material facts are facts relating directly to the property. A proposed zoning amendment, a planned highway project, or a planned road widening. It's not about the fact of the property itself, but it's related directly to the property. A material fact is a fact relating directly to the ability of the principal to complete the transaction. Please note, I'm not running around blurting out all my clients' confidential information. I owe them confidentiality, right? But what if my buyer client doesn't get loan approval? Do you think that's something important the seller needs to know? What if while we're under contract, my seller faces bankruptcy or foreclosure? The reason that that crosses the line from confidentiality to material fact is because it affects the principal's ability to complete the transaction. If the seller goes into bankruptcy while we're under contract, I have to disclose that to the buyer because the seller may not be able to sell the property depending on how the bankruptcy hearing can go. Usually with this third bullet point revolves around the inability to complete the transaction because of money, because of financing. Again, I'm not running around blurting, this is how much my seller is willing to accept. This is how much my buyer is willing to offer. That's confidential. When it becomes a material fact is when they can't complete the transaction. Everybody good with that? The other party has a right to know if we can't proceed. And then the last material fact is one thing we've been saying for a couple classes now. If it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then it's important to me. Any fact known to be of specific importance to your party is a material fact. So back to the buyer that wants to buy a house, convert the garage into a hair salon. Do I now have, as their agent, a material fact on my hand? Do I now have a duty, a responsibility, an obligation to make sure the house they buy, zoning and covenants, will allow them to convert that garage into a hair salon? That becomes a material fact to me. This is why we ask lots of questions. Not all people are willing to share. So we have to ask questions. We got to learn to get a little deeper. By asking questions, we can find out things that can help them get to what's important to them. I'd like everybody to please look with me on page 143. You guys see the 4 bullet points for material facts, and then the paragraph underneath that. Some issues have been declared to be material facts by the Real Estate Commission. Some things are material facts. Some things even the seller has to disclose. These are automatic material facts. EFIS is also known as synthetic stucco. Stucco is an exterior siding. When I see stucco siding, it looks like concrete. I tend to think of like those Spanish style homes. You guys know what I'm talking about? It looks like concrete. Synthetic stucco, though, means it's fake. Synthetic means it's fake stucco. And the problem with that sometimes is that moisture gets behind that exterior siding and it sits on, you know, the studs and the and the plywoods and the sheetrock and everything. And what have we just learned that moisture likes to do? Moisture likes to promote mold growth. So if the home has ever been clad in synthetic stucco, once we discover that it was synthetic stucco, it will always be a material fact, even if it was remediated. The best way to know if it's real or fake. Have you ever knocked on concrete before? When we're done with class, why don't you guys go outside and knock on your sidewalk or knock on your driveway if you can get to it through the ice? It's solid, right? If you knock on fake concrete, it's going to be hollow. It's going to have a hollow to it. So if you're listing a home that has stucco on it and you're not sure, just go knock on it. Something else that will always be a material fact is leaking polybutylene pipes. Polybutylene pipes is a construction material for pipes. I hate to say this, but it's a cheap product. And what happens to cheap products over time? When it comes to piping, they leak. But please note, it's not a material fact until it leaks. If it hasn't leaked yet, then it's not a material fact. This is one thing that the home inspector will do, which we'll talk about the home inspector. They'll help the buyer determine what kind of pipes they have. So leaking polybutylene pipes. And then the last automatic material fact are meth homes. A home that was used as the site of a previous meth lab. Once you cook that meth, it gets in the air, it sinks into the walls and the ceilings and the floors, and you can't get that out. So if you ever discover that a property was formerly a meth home, maybe there was a big bust in the neighborhood, maybe it was the tenant, right? I'm not ready to throw the seller out on the law yet. Anybody watch Breaking Bad? Where are my Breaking Bad people? A couple of you. It's a good one, isn't it? One of my favorite Saul moves ever is when he's getting the house for Jesse. The house at his parents' home. That house was formerly a meth house, wasn't it? And his parents came in and fixed it up and they redid it and they fixed the basement. And you could never tell that it was a meth house, but they found out. Jesse called his lawyer. His lawyer lowballed. His parents thought they were going to get up and walk away. And he said, well, I don't see any disclosure that this was previously a meth home. And what did the parents do? They sat their butts back down, didn't they? Great show, great scene. I don't know how you bleach. I'm not the expert on remediating meth from a home, but it was ever a meth house. I'm going to talk about that, Christina, back to William's question. We'll get to that on Thursday. Because I know everybody wants to know about the haunted house. I'll get to that on Thursday. So our 4 bullet points, pay specific attention to that paragraph, things that are automatic material facts, which means the seller needs to disclose them if they know about them. We talked about lead-based paint. And remember, I always disclose material facts. I don't care who you are. Are you a customer? Are you a client? I owe you material facts. I don't care who I am. Am I the listing agent? Am I the buyer's agent? Am I a dual agent that we'll talk about on Thursday? I always have a duty to disclose material facts, specifically these 4 bullet points. Any questions about this? So let's look at an example. Sarah is a listing agent. She's performing a listing presentation for Mark. During Sarah's walkthrough of the property, she notices a stain on the ceiling. So she asks Mark about the stain. Mark says, well, the roof's been leaking. I've repaired it 3 times, but it just needs to be replaced. This is why I'm selling. He tells Sarah not to mention it to the prospective buyer. He will repaint the ceiling before Sarah lists it. What's Sarah's choice? What's Sarah's option? Does she have to disclose that the roof leaks? Yes, because it's a material fact. This is a perfect example of I follow my client's lawful instructions. So when Mark says, shh, don't tell anybody. Now, Thursday, when we come together, we're going to talk about agency disclosure. Mark, if Sarah was doing her job right, Mark should have known this before he was giving Sarah the tour. Mark should have known that Sarah has this duty to discover and disclose material facts. And how does Mark do this? Know this? Those are the agency disclosure that we're going to get into. I got to warn people. I got to tell people. This is my license on the line. Honestly, guys, what should have Mark done? Why did Mark not paint that ceiling before Sarah ever got there? You with me? Sarah can't disclose what she doesn't know. Question came in, do I have to tell the seller that I'm legally obligated to disclose? Yes. And that's the agency disclosure that we're going to talk about on Thursday. Mark should have known that Sarah had to disclose this before she ever saw the spot on the ceiling. And that's that agency disclosure. He should, DeMario, but yeah, Mark messed up, didn't he? Why didn't Mark paint the ceiling before Sarah ever got there? Come on, Mark. All right. We are going to stop here. So when we come back on Thursday, we'll pick back up. I know you guys have questions about things that are not material facts, specifics. We're going to talk more about material facts when we come back. So real quick before we go, in Unit 20, we're going to go back in time for just a second. In Unit 20 of Learn, Test, Pass, I have the lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum, and I'll let you guys look at this. Any of the forms that we talk about, any of the addendum that we talk about, just kind of have an idea of what the addendums say. So the lead-based paint addendum, we're going to list the property. We're going to define who the seller and the buyer are. We're told that during the buyer's due diligence period, we'll talk about that in Unit 10. The buyer has the right to obtain a risk assessment or inspection of the property for the presence of lead at the buyer's expense. Buyer may waive the right to obtain the risk assessment and check for the presence at any time without cause. It's cautioned us, the buyer should have that EPA pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home, for more information. I can't give advice about the damage that lead's going to do. The best thing I can do is get my client the information that they need. And what do they need? That pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. Here's a warning statement. Every buyer of an interest of residential property that was built prior to, there's our magic year of 1978, is notified that such property may present exposure to lead from lead-based paint and may place young children at risk for developed lead poisoning. It goes on to explain what lead poisoning does, how it can affect children and pregnant women. The seller of any interest in residential property is required to provide the buyer with any information on lead-based paint from risk assessments. A risk assessment or inspection is recommended prior to purchase. So the seller's disclosure, the seller's going to disclose they know of lead-based paint or they have no knowledge of lead-based paint. Yes or no. And remember, they can't lie. So either they know or they don't. And if there's any records or reports, so if they know about it, they had those contractors come out and they had it tested, then they're going to have reports. And if they do have reports, they need to provide them to the buyer. So if they know, they have to disclose. If they have records or reports, they have to share them. And then the buyer acknowledges. The buyer acknowledges that they've received the seller statement above. The buyer acknowledges that they received the Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home EPA pamphlet. And then the buyer acknowledges that they have either accepted or waived the right to test for lead during their due diligence period. And again, I'll talk about the due diligence period in Unit 10. I'll let you guys read the rest of it. Buyer signs it, seller signs it. So the seller completes it for the listing. They make it available to the buyers with their disclosures. And upon presenting the offer, the buyer will acknowledge, now I have both parties on the signature. Questions or comments on the lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazard addendum, our first of many forms. Okay. The other thing I want to show you guys, well, first off, there's these, I like these 25% exams, kind of gives you a recap of the first 6 units plus unit 20, so the first 7 units. So these little checkpoints is what I call them. So we're 25% of the way in already. But the other thing I just want to point out, the Real Estate Commission published an article on meth homes and what our responsibilities are. So I just put this in here in case I know usually you guys have lots of questions about meth homes. So I just take you straight to the source. And here's the article from the Real Estate Commission. So if you're interested in learning more about it, here you go. Meth homes are growing, you betcha. Breaking Bad, man, I'm telling you. I think it inspired people, unfortunately. Okay. Jolie, I see I have a question. I may have to reach you outside of class because I know several of you got started on the study group last week, and I don't know if you guys have hooked up or connected or not, but I think what I'm going to start doing after class is just leaving my Zoom up. So if anybody wants to be in the study group or join now or get involved, you guys can all communicate. So remember, I go away. So if you have a specific question for me, please just make sure you reach out to me outside of class. If you want to stay and exchange numbers or emails or WhatsApp or Facebook group or however you guys want to study, then I'll leave the class open until you guys are done so you can communicate with each other. One more thing. When we come back on Thursday, we're going to pick up where we left off. We've got more to talk about material facts. And then we're going to talk about the different types of agencies. So you got single agency, you got dual agency, you got designated dual agency. So we keep going in Unit 7. If you haven't looked ahead yet, please do so before Thursday. I promise this information is a lot easier if you can look it over before we talk about it in class. Questions? William, we can either do it